getting me down, getting me down, baby. I'm just a thorn in your crown, thorn in your crown. Lately, you've been getting me down, getting me down. If you leave, I will be just fine, be just fine. In the beat, I can get so high, get so high. If you leave, I will be just fine, be just fine. I'm getting higher, getting higher, getting higher, getting higher with every sound.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. My name is Walker America. I am here with you every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on RoxomTV. We've got a great show ahead of us today. We've got a couple guests coming in. One, Ken Egan from Bitcoin Policy Institute. The other one, Bitcoin developer Merch. We're going to have a fun show. We've got a lot of Bitcoin news, world news, and everything in between to bring to you today. The current price of Bitcoin is $87,704 infinitely printable US dollars or Federal Reserve notes per Bitcoin. And we're going to dive right into our first story of the day. The first story we have is over in France, across the pond over there, where France has moved to ban social media for under 15s in a landmark vote. French lawmakers voted to ban children under 15 from using social media, adopting legislation aimed at curbing excessive screen time and protecting young people's mental health. Both worthy goals, of course, but what are the repercussions? Now, the bill passed the lower house by 130 votes to 21 after an overnight session and will now move to the Senate for final approval. President Emmanuel Macron welcomed the move as a, quote, major step to shield children from online manipulation and harmful content. The legislation would make France the second country after Australia to impose a nationwide social media ban for minors. It also includes a ban on mobile phones in high schools and would require platforms to introduce effective age verification systems. Authorities aim to enforce the rules from the start of the 2026 school year for new accounts, with existing underage accounts expected to be deactivated by the end of the year. The law excludes educational platforms and online encyclopedias. Supporters argue the measure is necessary to address rising concerns over cyberbullying, violent content, and declining mental health among adolescents, particularly girls. France's public health watchdog has warned of several harmful effects linked to heavy social media use. However, critics on the left have described the ban as digital paternalism, while child protection groups have urged lawmakers to focus on holding platforms accountable rather than restricting children's access. Former Prime Minister Elizabeth Bourne also had cautioned that enforcement challenges could undermine the policy's effectiveness. Now, again, this is a similar story to what we've seen in Australia, which has already become law, what we've seen in the United Kingdom, which is currently under debate, and what we've seen proposed in a number of different countries. Ultimately, this is something that's let's say, a worthy goal, right? The goal is to protect children, and who would argue against protecting children, right? But the problem is that governments tend to wrap their attempts at creating a digital panopticon in one of two arguments. They wrap it either as protecting children or as counterterrorism. There's a great meme on that subject that I'm sure you can find if you Google it. And again, the problem here is that while this is a worthy goal, certainly social media has detrimental effects on people's mental health, not just young people, but I think people of all ages, as we're seeing with the mass psychosis that seems to have developed around the world. But the problem is in the implementation of this. As you heard earlier, this is about the way that you implement this is by enabling age verification on these online platforms. So that, of course, applies to everyone. In order to prove you're not a child, in order to prove you're not under 15 years old, you would need to provide a identification to use these platforms. That effectively links your participation in these platforms to your real world identity. Anonymity be damned. This is one of the ways that governments really have a clear and very elegant way of essentially making sure that everyone's online usage is tied to their real world identity. And you may say, well, I'm not a criminal. I don't have anything to hide, right? Why do you need privacy if you have nothing to hide, as the old trope goes? But the problem is that this is just one step in a larger plan. The larger plan, of course, is to ultimately implement a pseudo-social credit system, as we've seen in China. And necessarily for that to happen, you have to be able to identify and monitor what people are doing online. If they're able to act online anonymously, that makes it very difficult to decide what their social credit score would be and punish them for bad behavior. The next part of this plan is, of course, implementing a central bank digital currency. The digital euro has been floated and touted by the likes of Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank. And again, people may think, well, this is just going to be more convenient. Of course, I want to protect the kids. Who could argue against protecting the kids after all? But again, the problem with this is that this isn't just about protecting the kids. This is about making sure that the government has the ability to surveil everyone's activity online and be able to stamp out behavior that they do not like. We've already seen arrests for social media usage are very rampant in the UK, in Germany, in many other countries. This is not something that anyone wants, and those get a lot easier to do if you are no longer able to be anonymous or pseudonymous online. Now, again, everyone wants to protect the kids, right? But the problem is that protecting the kids needs to start at home. I'm all for removing phones from schools. Why, they don't really need those during school time, right? That's completely fine. That doesn't actually impact anyone outside of the people it's directly being used on, which is the children, making sure they're not using their phones during schools. Fine. But when it comes to creating a digital panopticon and essentially a digital surveillance state over all of social media and all online activity, ultimately verified by your real world identification to prove your age, of course, to protect the kids, not to surveil you, that's where things get dangerous. And I think that this is a time where people need to realize that there are trade-offs with everything. The making sure your kids are protected and not, using social media too much or using their phones too much, period, that needs to start at home. The more that we abdicate responsibility for what our children do, and we abdicate that responsibility and give the responsibility of monitoring that to the state, the worse off we're going to be. You already have compulsory public schools in many countries. Germany is a key example of this, where it's actually illegal to homeschool your kids. So there's already a great scale of abdication among parents across the world. But again, I would caution people that the more power you give the state, whether that power is granted to the state for, purportedly noble means, that power will be abused. It's already being abused. This is not something that you have to look back long into history to find out. You can just look at what's happening in the UK right now, where again, people are being arrested for social media posts. The more that our real world identities are ultimately tied to our online behavior, not only does this create a massive data honeypot, which will, if you look at all of the recent Bitcoin and crypto kidnappings in France, where a bunch of data has been leaked by French authorities, sometimes very purposefully being leaked by French authorities, and then people are targeted. This same sort of thing can happen when you have absolutely everybody's ID linked to their social media usage. Again, the reasoning for this, which is not actually the real reasoning, but the one that they put forward, is reasonable. We all want to protect the kids. We all want children's mental health to improve and not be completely destroyed by these gamified social media applications. But again, sometimes the medicine is worse than the disease. And in this case, the medicine is one that will make the entire nation sick. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in France with this, whether or not people push back or whether they continue to be tricked by the age-old trap of how would you like this packaged? Protect the kids or counter terrorism. Moving on to our next story, Major League Soccer partners with Polymarket. Polymarket has signed a multi-year contract to become the exclusive prediction market partner of Major League Soccer and its League's Cup tournament, aiming to deepen fan engagement through real-time forecasting and interactive features. Under the agreement, Polymarket and MLS plan to introduce second screen experiences that allow fans to follow live data, statistics, and market sentiment tied to matches and season storylines. Polymarket CEO Shane Copland said the partnership would give supporters a more interactive, data-driven way to follow the sport as soccer's popularity continues to grow in the United States, or football as they call it across the pond. The league and the prediction platform said the deal includes safeguards to protect the integrity of games, wink, including independent monitoring of trading activity. MLS said the measures are designed to prevent market manipulation and ensure betting-related features do not affect on-field competition. Let's see how that works out. The partnership comes as prediction markets are gaining momentum following regulatory moves by the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission that have allowed some platforms to expand. Trading volumes on Polymarket and rival Kalshi have reached record levels in recent weeks, even as several U.S. states challenge the legality of sports betting prediction contracts in court. Now, analysts say that the MLS agreement marks one of the most significant milestones in mainstream sports partnerships yet for prediction markets, highlighting their growing role in fan engagement while also intensifying debates over regulation and oversight. And I think that this whole story is really emblematic of the prediction market saga, right? At the end of the day, what are prediction markets? Well, in most cases, and our guest Alex Leishman last week on this program made this point very clearly, but the vast majority of the volume on these prediction markets is simply sports betting. And now sports betting is not illegal in all states, but because prediction markets are federally regulated, this is a loophole, essentially. It's a way to have sports betting everywhere, but you just call it a prediction market, and then you're not subject to the same oversight, right? Ultimately, too, as we zoom out a little bit further, this is just a sign of the times. It's a sign of the times where everybody feels that they need to gamble. Everybody feels that they need to speculate because our money is fundamentally broken and people feel that they have no chance at getting ahead. They have no way to possibly catch up to be where their parents were or their grandparents were at their age. They simply feel rather trapped. And the only way to get out of that malaise, to get out of that nihilism, is to gamble, is to speculate, is to look for ways to possibly, have their quick ticket to from rags to riches. They want to be able to basically jump ahead and try to get ahead of where they currently are. Ultimately, these prediction markets, too, I think, are ripe for manipulation. We've already seen this. We've seen this many times. You see this with various, administration or political insiders placing very potentially well-timed bets on this. But insider trading in politics is nothing new whatsoever. This is something that, Nancy Pelosi has really been at the forefront of for many years. Of course, she'll be retiring soon with her many, many millions after insider trading on material non-public information from her seat in Congress. But at the end of the day, again, I think the important thing to remember here is that this is going to intensify. Prediction markets are not going away. If you see targeted ads all over the place about these prediction markets, it's emphasizing everything from betting on the weather to, again, betting on sports, but it really comes down to betting on sports. It's just a way to make sports betting even more prevalent. And again, why are people doing it? Well, it's not just because they enjoy sports betting, which of course a lot of people do, but it's because the money is broken. It's because people don't have a way to effectively save. They don't have a way to get ahead. And when people are staring down the barrel of a life without even being able to afford a house, they will really do whatever it takes to speculate and try to give themselves a better chance at that. You can't blame people, but ultimately this shouldn't surprise anyone. This is really just a sign of the times that we live in. Now, another sign of the times just relates to the ability of centralized platforms to perhaps surveil you, even when they claim that they do not. Meta has recently denied that it has access to WhatsApp chats amid a global privacy lawsuit. Breaking this down, Meta has rejected claims that it can secretly access users' private WhatsApp messages, pushing back against allegations raised in a new lawsuit filed in a U.S. federal court. According to a report by Cointelegraph, plaintiffs from countries including Australia, Mexico, South Africa, and India accused the company of maintaining backdoor access to encrypted chats, arguing that WhatsApp's privacy protections are misleading. The lawsuit challenges WhatsApp's use of end-to-end encryption, which is supposed to ensure that only senders and recipients can read messages. Meta's communications director, Andy Stone, dismissed the claims as, quote, categorically false, calling the case a, quote, frivolous work of fiction, and insisting that Meta cannot view private conversations. The company continues to point to its public encryption policies as proof that user data remains secure. Plaintiffs argue, however, that technical loopholes and software design choices undermine those guarantees and expose users to potential surveillance. The case seeks damages and greater transparency over how Meta handles encrypted data. It also has attracted the attention from rivals in the messaging industry, including Telegram's founder, who questioned whether WhatsApp can truly be considered secure. Of course, the same should be asked of Telegram. The dispute comes amid growing public concern over digital privacy and the power of large technology platforms. As governments and courts worldwide scrutinize how companies manage user data, the lawsuit could become a major test of whether end-to-end encryption protections hold up under legal and technical scrutiny. Now, of course, most of these questions would be answered if centralized platforms made all of their code base public, if they open sourced their code, right? But most of them do not do this. Again, they view that as proprietary information, and they wouldn't want anyone to, of course, steal their trade secrets, right? But at the end of the day, this is why open source technology is so important. If you don't have the ability of outside auditors from all over the world to be able to really put an application through its paces and look at it in heavy detail, you're always just going to be kind of guessing as to whether they have a backdoor. Now, we know that security agencies, three-letter agencies in the US and abroad, they have all sorts of different means of hacking into people's phones. They don't even need backdoors in most cases. If you go to some of their more advanced programs, right, they're able to basically completely take control of your phone and see absolutely everything that's done on there. And the other thing is we know that intelligence agencies have worked with large platforms before. We know that they do widespread monitoring of traffic, that they put out a big dragnet and they see what they can pick up in that dragnet. And they say that, of course, they're not really looking for just normal people's stuff, but sometimes it gets caught up in their large dragnet, right? We've seen this sort of spying exposed by the likes of Edward Snowden and many others. This is, again, not new. It's not speculation. It's reality. The question really is, how much do you trust these platforms? And can you trust any of these platforms if their code base is not fully open sourced? I certainly wouldn't. But of course, a lot of people do. WhatsApp is incredibly popular across the world, in just about every single country. It's one of those things, though, where unless you are, again, willing to completely put your trust in the company that is providing a solution, you have to put your trust in them if it's not open source, right? But this is where some of these decentralized open source freedom technology alternatives, applications like White Noise, which is built on Nostr and is using a variation of the Signal protocol for encryption, also a new protocol called Marmot. Now, these are incredibly powerful tools. White Noise is just one example. There are, of course, others. White Noise is currently in beta Hopefully, it'll be released to the general public soon. But these are the kinds of tools we need. And they're powerful because it's not requiring you to trust anyone, right? It's completely open sourced. It's available to the public. It can be fully audited by individuals or security firms to give people who are using it confidence that there is no backdoor to their data. Again, though, people tend to use what is more convenient. They tend to use whatever technology, whatever application is going to be the easiest one for them to download quickly and that preferably all of their friends are already using. Now, again, you may say, but Walker, why do I need privacy if I have nothing to hide? I'm not saying anything bad in my WhatsApp chats, in my Telegram chats, in my iMessages. I'm not saying anything that would get me in trouble, right? But here's the problem with that line of thinking. Saying that you don't care about, and this is I'm paraphrasing an Edward Snowden quote here actually, but saying that you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide is the same thing as saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. It's ultimately a pretty idiotic argument to make. No offense to anybody who has made that argument. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that no matter what you're saying, somebody doesn't have a back door either at the company or at an intelligence agency to be able to monitor that, right? Because when somebody is completely law-abiding and has nothing to hide, sure, I'd like to remind that person that the laws can change, that if you are somehow become a target of an intelligence agency or of just a hacker who's trying to exploit some of your data, then these things become very real and very important at a personal level. But I think that most people at this point would rather trade convenience and have convenience than have actual security, than have actual privacy. People routinely give up their sensitive personal information just to get a discount code or whatever it may be. That information is then sold. I'm sure everybody receives an ungodly amount of robocalls and robotexts per day, right? And of course, you can pay various companies to get you removed from all these lists. One has to wonder, of course, if those companies are some of the ones creating some of the robocalls in the first place to drive demand for the very product that they're then selling you. I would say most likely yes, but that's just speculation, of course. Again, what I'd like to remind people is that like with our earlier story about France's social media, often it's very easy to say, well, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I have nothing to hide. This is ultimately, for the greater good, whatever it may be. I don't care if people are viewing my messages. But a law-abiding citizen can easily become a criminal when the laws change, and they frequently do. You should be able to have privacy. Privacy is actually crucial to having a functioning democratic society. If you cannot speak privately, truly privately, you can't actually have true free speech. There's two aspects to free speech. One is being able to speak publicly and say what you want publicly, as long as you're not calling, for direct violence to a particular person, right? But to say what you want to say publicly and without the fear of reprisal, right? To be able to criticize your national leader, to be able to criticize your elected officials. This is such an important piece. But it's also important to be able to speak privately. If you can not speak privately, I don't think that you truly have free speech. You need that private communication, the ability to share thoughts privately without the fear of the government or a centralized corporation snooping on you and trying to find issue with whatever you're saying. Again, all of this comes down to the larger theme of governments and through their proxies, these large, multinational corporations, being able to exert greater and greater influence on you through greater and greater surveillance of you. When they control your channels of communication, whether it's public on social media or private for person-to-person messaging, they have a great deal of influence. They have a great deal of power. They have a great deal of information about you. And all of these things can be weaponized against you. They can be weaponized against you to then be a reason to debank you. Debanking you becomes easier if there's a central bank digital currency involved. But that's not even required for debanking. We saw that the Canadian truckers, it's a great example that I will continually bring up, average everyday people who were peacefully protesting, who then had their bank accounts shut down because of what they were doing, right? Because of all that information that could be traced back to them, because they were so easy to find, because the government, of course, had access to all of this, right? So we need to be able to have anonymous and pseudonymous spaces online, going back to the French social media age requirement. We need to be able to have private communications that we can be certain neither a government nor a centralized corporation is monitoring. We need to be able to speak freely, again, in public and in private. And we need to be able to have open source technologies that are available to us to use. Thankfully, they are things like Nostr, things like BitChat, which we've covered extensively on this program here on Roxom, things like white noise. All of these tools, you may not need them now. You may think that at this point, it's really not necessary. It's overkill. This is just stuff for nerds. Well, that was the case for Bitcoin at the start too, right? People thought this is just magic internet money for geeks and nerds, right? Who would actually need something like this? Well, the answer is millions and millions of people all around the world who live in authoritarian regimes and have been debanked or were never banked in the first place and need a way to actually interact with the financial system. But it also helps people who are not living in authoritarian regimes, people who are living in supposedly democratic countries who can still be debanked, like the Canadian truckers. So you may say, why do you need Bitcoin? The banking system works just fine. Well, sure, until it doesn't. Why do you need open source, decentralized social media? So regular centralized social media works just fine. Well, sure, until it doesn't. Why do you need open source, freedom tech messaging tools that are completely encrypted and don't have any corporate or government backdoors in them? WhatsApp, Telegram, Facebook Messenger, they all work just fine. Well, until they don't. So the point is, with all of these things, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. This is why I will continually beat the drum that everyone listening to this should take the time to at least play around with these freedom tech tools. You can keep using, do whatever you want, doesn't matter to me. But I would encourage you to at least learn how to use Bitcoin, learn how to use Nostr, learn how to use something like white noise or BitChat. You may not need it right now, but I can promise that you will at some point. And when that day comes, you're going to be a lot better off if you actually know how to use it versus scrambling and trying to figure it out later. So again, trying to do my best to loop these stories here together because I do think they are all related to that larger theme of increasing government surveillance, often enabled by centralized technology platforms, often enabled by central social media platforms. The governments can lean on these platforms. We're seeing this all over. Specifically in Europe, we've even seen them try to exert influence on companies in the United States, try to restrict the ability for companies in the United States to operate because they won't censor the free speech of American citizens, even in cases where those companies are not in any way operating in Europe. They're operating in cyberspace, right? The fact that people in Europe can access them is a function of the global internet. But I think what we're seeing on a larger scale is governments around the world trying to restrict the free and open access to the internet. They do not actually want the internet to be free and open. They don't want the internet to be what it was designed to be, which is a global communication network. They want to be able to silo things off. They want to be able to cut off access in their country when it suits them. And of course they can. They can easily do that. The only reason that some supposedly democratic Western, established first world countries are not doing that on a large scale is because their citizens might actually get pissed off enough to do something about it. But we see this in Iran, where they shut down the internet amid ongoing protests there against the regime. We saw it recently in Uganda, where BitChat usage surged because they shut down the internet. The regime shut down the internet ahead of the election. These things can happen in the developed, so-called developed world as well. It's only a matter of time. And so I would encourage people to resist this totalitarian temptation at every turn. Remember that the government does not give you your rights. The government doesn't give you your freedoms. You're already free. The government can enshrine protections for those freedoms in law, but primarily the government can just take away those freedoms. They can make it illegal to exercise those freedoms. But what they can't do is stop open source, decentralized technologies. Once the genie is out of the bottle with open source tech, it doesn't go back in. It's out there for everyone to use, for everyone to copy. Information wants to be free, and it will be free, despite all the efforts of governments to the contrary. So I'll leave it at that for now. We're going to talk about some of these topics again a little bit later in greater detail. For now, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. Shortly after we come back, we are going to bring on Ken Egan from the Bitcoin Policy Institute to talk about some of the developments on the Bitcoin policy front in Washington, D.C., here in the swamp. You're going to like hearing from Ken. He's got a fascinating history as well. So we're going to go to a quick commercial break to hear from our sponsors. Don't touch that dial. We will be right back here on RoxomTV. Stay tuned.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed. This sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising. The dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed two brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you, don't go!
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. I'm your host, Walker America, here from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Tuesday on RoxomTV. The price of Bitcoin is 87,675 infinitely printable U.S. Federal Reserve notes per Bitcoin. We're about to bring up our first guest of the day here. Our guest is Ken Egan. Ken is the Director of Government Affairs at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and we're actually going to be doing a recurring segment with folks from the Bitcoin Policy Institute here every Tuesday on Roxom. Extremely excited about that and excited to have you here on the program. Ken, how you doing?
Thank you, Walker. Great. We were, as we were saying before, last time we caught up, it was really hot, and now it's really cold. DC's been closed for 2 days now, following the snow on Sunday.
Yeah, whether it's the government shutdown or the weather shutdown, I guess any excuse to shut things down is I don't know if it's a good or a bad one. Depends on who you ask. But
have any of your listeners realized that the government's been closed for 2 days? I don't know. No, well, but it has been.
These kind of slide under the rug sometimes, right? It's like, oh, well, because I think it's because most people don't really notice a difference.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And in all fairness, this is just the DC area. The rest of people living in warmer climates still have their post offices open and their facilities. But DC's where all the how do you call it? Want to call it magic? where all the magic happens. And again, it snows every year here. But for some reason, every year is like the first time it's ever snowed, and it is like Armageddon outside.
Oh boy. Well, good excuse. We were talking just before this about PubKey as well. As I'd seen a picture of PubKey being sort of snowed in there. And I've got to say, seeing what BPI is now co-located with PubKey DC, the office looks great. The new PubKey looks great. And I've got to say, still from that opening party that PubKey had there, it was amazing. You saw the Treasury Secretary there, a lot of other folks. It just feels like kind of a very unique time there in DC. Is that fair, or is this, just par for the course with in terms of mingling, hobnobbing with higher up folks in government and the Treasury?
I'm willing to guess that this is the first time that a sitting Treasury Secretary has been at a restaurant opening where there was a Chinese dragon, where there was Santa Claus, where there was some of you had probably seen him, the guy in the wrestling mask, doing your roasting you over candlelight. Like PubKey's like nothing DC's ever seen. As I was saying, DC, the DC social scene is really become very sort of bougie over the past decade, and there's nothing like PubKey in DC right now. And it's a great vibe because you can't see much outside, and there's really cool artwork on the door, and you walk in, and people are just like, what is this place? I've been here a long time. I've had friends come over and check it out, and they're literally like, what is this place? This is PubKey.
It's a bit of a Bitcoin-based vibe shift, right? It's maybe a little bit of a changing of the guard and just kind of an injection of some of that Bitcoin culture into some of the DC swamp culture, I guess.
Yeah, and there's always been a sort of nascent Bitcoin scene here. I started going to meetups back in just after COVID. And it was a great place to learn Bitcoin. Like the Bit Devs was headed by James O'Byrne. What a cool, when you start learning Bitcoin, you have like James O'Byrne to talk to. It's pretty cool. Although your listeners probably know Average Gary out in Shenandoah. He's here. Like there was a great sort of foundational Bitcoin scene in DC. But it was just like the freaks and the plebs, showing up at Compass Coffee, the Bitcoin coffee chain in DC area. Showing up at Compass Coffee once a month to talk about whatever we were talking about that night. But now you've got PubKey, you've got congressional staffers, White House staffers, all showing up to happy hours. I don't know how many of them are paying in Bitcoin yet, but they're there, and the PubKey vibe is infectious. It is just a great scene. And again, but the team is great. Like Thomas and Dan, these guys know how to. They are like consummate hosts, and it's a pretty cool place to walk in and out of every day, going to work.
Yeah, no, I love it. And maybe before we kind of get into a couple of the topics here, if you could just give a bit of an overview of how you got involved with BPI, because again, I love the work that you guys are doing there. It's perhaps often a thankless job. A lot of it is behind the scenes, but you guys are making big moves there. So how did you get involved with BPI in the first place?
So I am getting to about my 1 year anniversary. I started last February. It's actually a funny story. Last January, a lot of people were here for inauguration, and David Zell and Grant McCarty, the co-founders, were in town. And I knew them. I'd done some advocacy stuff with them on the side. And they said, "Hey, let's have dinner." And I told my wife I'm going to go have dinner with Bitcoin friends. She's like, "Yeah, whatever. Go see your Bitcoin friends." And I came back. I was like, "Hey, guess what? I'm leaving my job and I'm going to work at the Bitcoin Policy Institute." She's like, "You're insane." But it's been a hell of a year. But my background, I'm a retired CIA officer. I was an operations officer at CIA, and that's kind of where I first got into Bitcoin, not because of Bitcoin for what it is, but Bitcoin because it was a tool that certain actors used. But Bitcoin is a virus, and if you especially if you're open to it, by 2020, I was a crypto COVID baby, so to speak, and I did all the things, DeFi. I did all the things, and I have no hate for the rest of the system. It's fine. People can do what they want. But by 2021, I was as I say, I was clean, altcoin free, and all into Bitcoin. And I started doing, when I retired from government in 2022, I started doing some advocacy stuff on Capitol Hill with Club for Growth and some other people, just talking to staffers about national security issues and Bitcoin and why this is important. And that's how I got to know Grant and David. And it led when President Trump was elected and BPI decided to open their office in DC. I actually saw the job opening, but I didn't apply. And then, we had dinner, and lo and behold, a year later, I'm working in the back of a bar with these guys. It's great.
Oh, yeah, the rest, as they say, is
it's a great job. Yeah, and BPI is growing. BPI is growing. So,
I love it. And you guys are really, I think, really dialed into the scene there. And I do love that the focus of BPI, this is not the Crypto Policy Institute, right? This is the Bitcoin Policy Institute. It is exclusively Bitcoin focused. There are other advocacy groups out there who do more, let's say, widespread work in the broader crypto community, but you guys are laser focused on Bitcoin, correct?
That's right. So BPI has an advantage that we're not a trade organization. We're a think tank. We're a 501c3. You can donate to BPI and take a tax contribution, tax deduction. But that gives you a lot of flexibility that you're not obligated to do the industry things with policymakers or on Capitol Hill. Our goal is to promote and advance policies that help America become a Bitcoin superpower. Our sort of tagline is, provide analysis that helps America through the rise of Bitcoin. And that's what we do. It's very refreshing because, we have great relationships with the rest of the crypto industry in DC. There's some good folks doing good work. There are a lot of Bitcoiners out there working in organizations that they probably could be better off working at BPI. But again, there's space for everybody in this town. But the advantage we have at BPI is that we are a policy organization, and also that buys you a lot of goodwill of policymakers. Because I joke, we're doing well because we happen to be shilling a really great product. But at the end of the day, we're not really shilling anything, right? We are providing insights and analysis on issues that matter. And there's there's huge appetite for it because there's more now than there was 5 years ago, but there's still only a handful of people on Capitol Hill and even in the administration that really understand this industry and the impact it's going to have, I think, on the global economy. So there is this insatiable demand for the things that BPI, our thought leadership, and it's great fun. I mean, imagine being. I know a lot of Bitcoiners think the idea of dealing with government people all day long is just absolutely horrifying. And it's not always amazing, but for the most part, it is the best job in the world being able to talk to people about Bitcoin and why it's important for America.
No, I love it. I mean, it's not a job I would necessarily want to do, right? But I'm very glad that you guys are doing it. From my brief experience on Capitol Hill, I gained so much more respect for you guys than I already had. It was already very high, but I got even more respect because I was like, wow, this is an uphill battle in a lot of cases. And one thing I want to ask you about, Ken, because I feel like there's been, initially with this new administration, obviously there was a huge vibe shift. Night and day from sort of the Biden admin or whoever was running the Biden admin from their sort of operation, choke point 2.0 situation there, which was very antagonistic to Bitcoin and crypto more broadly. But there was a huge vibe shift. We saw the strategic Bitcoin reserve executive order come through pretty early on. I know you guys had a lot of that language came from you guys actually, which is fantastic. And now it seems there's a bit of a, that's still on the, in the background there. There's obviously, I think, trying to get that codified into law is a huge priority. But there's a lot of focus now on, the market structure bill, the clarity bill. There was the Genius Act prior. Let's start a little bit, maybe just on the market structure side of things, kind of what's happened recently and where this is going. Can you give folks a little bit of a breakdown of just kind of where that's at and what that actually means for the Bitcoin and quote crypto industry more broadly?
Sure. And Bitcoin's an interesting beast in that, as opposed to a lot of other, actually almost every other trade organization in DC, Bitcoiners don't want anything from the government. We just want the government to leave us be. And that sometimes is actually a really hard ask, because the system is sort of like is hard coded to figure out what it can give you or what you want from it. And all we want is for Bitcoiners to be able to Bitcoin, and for software developers to be able to write code, and for you and me to be able to self-custody our Bitcoin. That's what we want. We don't want the government to give us anything. And the system is just not hard coded for that. So it's an interesting dynamic. But on the market structure side, so I still think, I'm still confident that there will be a bill before Congress sort of disappears for midterms come the summer. But as of last week, and it was a pretty high profile split. There's been a, well, maybe some context is good. So 2025, Genius Act passed, all kinds of favor regulations. But the result of all that was that the banking industry really took some setbacks. I mean, I think by the end of last year, they were sort of spitting their teeth out and trying to figure out how to regroup to protect their interests. So Genius, they hated the Genius Act, for example. They still hate it. And I think you saw sort of the most prominent example of that was how stablecoin rewards were dragged back into market structure legislation. The give on stablecoin legislation on Genius last year was that you wouldn't be able, issuers couldn't give you and me rewards or interest on our stablecoins, which means that the interest that they're getting from the federal government to buy short-term bills to actually back these things, they get to keep that. They can keep that, but you can't have any of it. But fine. I think that was what needed to be done to get the bill passed, and this is what they did. But I think there's been the onslaught of digital asset victories over last year really put the banking industry into a difficult position. You might have seen in the end of last year, the banking lobby launched the American Growth Alliance, which is essentially the banking industry's answer to stay with crypto. We're going to raise money, and we're going to influence elections, and we're going to fight the crypto guys on the electoral battlefield, and that's what they're doing. And I think you saw a much more organized counteroffensive by the banking industry on market structure, and they took the opportunity to try to incorporate this ban on all stablecoin rewards into the bill, and that of course provoked the ire of Coinbase. The most notable provider of these rewards is Coinbase. If you hold USDC on Coinbase, they pay you rewards. It's functionally an interest, but they pay you, I think it's 3.3%, something like that. But certainly a lot more interest than you would get holding money in your checking account in the bank. In the banking industry, this was their chance, and they saw some weakness in the discussions, and they intervened, and it really set the negotiations back. You remember late last year there was a leaked memo. There was an internal memo about some sort of thinking on the Democrat side about DeFi, and that was sort of the first hurdle that kind of like caused some bad blood between the two sides. I think the banking industry took advantage of that bad blood and pushed for this rewards ban, which is most very famously Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase, came out very strongly against such, and it's not the only reason, such that it ended up in the bill being in negotiations being suspended. So that was a big deal, and I think compounding that, I was up on the Hill last week talking to a staffer whose member is not leading in these discussions, but nonetheless is part of it. And there's so much fatigue. I mean, there was so much sadness in this young guy's face because they've just been beaten to death by crypto lobbyists over the past couple of months. So now the negotiations on the Senate banking version have been suspended. And last night we saw the release of 2 days ago, release from the Senate Agriculture Committee on their version of market structure. You might find that strange. Why is the Senate Agriculture Committee commenting on digital asset legislation? That's because they have oversight over the CFTC, the Commodities Future Exchange Commission, Trading Commission rather, and of course CFTC plays a role in futures. So ag has a bill now, a much more sort of pared back bill. And now it's negotiation time. They're meeting, I think, today, and there's a markup. They're trying to figure out what this bill is going to look like, but they're all very sort of deliberately avoiding talking about stablecoins. And that stablecoin piece is sticky. The interest on stablecoins is sticky. So we'll see what happens. Our primary concern at BPI, of course, are the provisions in the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. These are the pieces of legislation that should concern Bitcoiners the most. This is the part of legislation that guarantees your right to self custody, protects that. This is the part of legislation that protects software developers, that prevents them from being held liable for using their software, as in like being declared a money services business. So this is the part of the software that we're laser focused on right now. And so we're curious to see what comes out of the agricultural discussions. But we are ready to get back into this fight to make sure that these provisions in the BRC are protected.
I appreciate the context on that, and apologies. I've had some AV issues here, so I'm streaming through a new camera. I'll try to get that sorted out. So, I mean, I think that this is really interesting for folks because it really displays sort of how this process works in DC in terms of some of the machinations that happen behind the scenes and the realization that, okay, these big banks play a huge role in this. They have a massive amount of power and they can move the needle. I mean, is this just really, it seems to me this is something where stable coins, whatever you think of them, being able to have a decent interest payment on that versus what the banks pay, this is something that'd be beneficial for Americans. It seems that the big banks are just really kind of trying to protect their regulatory moat that they have or establish a bigger one. But this is just ultimately something that's sort of inevitable. I would think that people are going to demand this at some point. I mean, do you think that this, how do you see this playing out? Do the banks eventually give way when they figure out how they can, or, you know, how they can still make their yield on this? Or what's their, you know, kind of the next step here?
So I challenge anybody to make a financial inclusion argument against being able to pay you or me interest on stable coins. And then, you know, again, most people don't have access to financial products that actually yield anything. So they just hold you melting dollars, and just sort of you eat that depreciation. I think that I'll concede this. You know, we do, and a lot of the opposition to this has come from community banks. These community banks, and this is not like, I think, you know, JP Morgan has been very vocal about their thoughts about this legislation. But these community banks, these small sort of farmers banks, have long-standing ties with a lot of these members, going back decades, roots in the community. And these are the banks that are expressing concern. But of course, these are the banks that are also suffering from competition from the big banks. So I agree with you, and I make this point to certainly Democrats. Like, if you're really interested in financial inclusion, like, make it easier for people to actually gain a little bit of yield on these dollars that they're forced to hold. I do think it's just a matter of time before the banking system figures out how to take advantage of this and make money on their own. I also, the argument that I make a lot to national security staff is that if you want to maintain dollarization, continue dollarization, if you want the U.S. to be able to still use its policy tools that it's grown addicted to, certainly since 2001, you need to encourage dollarization on some level. And imagine the demand for an instrument like, imagine a Tether paid you even 2% on your money, if you're living in, you know, pick a country, right, anywhere in Latin America, Africa. People that could never in the world, in their wildest imagination, envision having a yield-bearing product. Imagine the demand for something like that in Latin America or Africa, anywhere in the world, even in Asia. If you could hold, I'm choosing Tether because it's the biggest, but any stable coin that actually provide you yield, the demand will be insatiable. And I think that would mean a lot of sort of their national security policy goals. Nonetheless, we have to get through this. I think there will be a grand compromise. I'm curious to see what where the Coinbase guys eventually come out. I know there's a lot of meetings right now and trying to figure out what to do with this, because the agriculture committee really didn't address it. And the agriculture committee's job is to sell soybeans to China, things like that. And all of a sudden they're stuck dealing with the crypto lobby. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But it is what it is. They're the overseer of the CFTC. So we'll see. I think there'll eventually be a compromise because both parties, for different reasons, want this to happen. The Democrats do not want to be seen as having blocked crypto legislation again. I mean, they saw what happened on sort of the campaign finance front last cycle. They had ambitions this year in midterms. I think they'd like to be able to tell the crypto industry, look, we helped you. And the Republicans, even though support for this is not as uniform as you think it is, there are a lot of Republican senators that have concerns about this stuff. But they also want to be able to, on some level, implement President Trump's agenda. So there's interest on both sides. I do think there'll be some kind of bill. And our concern at BPI is that the trade is not, okay, we will negotiate on blockchain return certain act provisions in order to gain ground elsewhere. Because I had some concerning conversations over the past couple of days, and this is with both parties, that this argument that like we need AML, we can't exist without AML is really sticky, and that's sort of problematic because there's a sort of like DC has gone certainly since 2001. There's an entire ecosystem of people that work just in like tweaking the financial system, whether it's at the Fed, whether it's at FinCEN, parts of Treasury, at OFAC. Money is a weapon, is a policy tool, and they've gotten used to using it. Anything that threatens their ability to use that, they reflexively revolt against. They don't like it because it's sort of how they're programmed. And I've had some discussions with staff over the past couple of days about how they have concerns that these provisions in the BRCA that would, for example, allow you to not be declared a bank if you write code, the concerns about that is problematic. So this is why everybody I talk to, Bitcoiners need to very politely contact your representatives and let them know that those BRCA provisions are non-negotiable. Because without that, what do we have, right? I mean, BRCA is theoretically, if we had it our own way, is the first thing we would have done back last year when President Trump came in office. But this is not how the system works. But we are deeply concerned that these provisions will become sort of a negotiating tool for other aspects of the bill that really don't affect us, don't affect Bitcoiners. They affect the crypto industry. So Bitcoiners need to stay frosty, make polite phone calls to your representatives and let them know that you're watching and BRCA is important, and that's what we're doing every day.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's like this is the part of that bill that Bitcoiners that I think that you guys at BPI care about the most. It's really the part that is impacting Bitcoin, and it's impacting real people's lives right now. Bill and Keone, the Samurai Wallet developers who are now in federal prison after they took a plea deal with the Southern District or Sovereign District of New York. And that case, it's something we've covered extensively here. I talked to Keone right before he had to report to prison too. I mean, it's just, to me, it's insane because I would hope that President Trump would see that if he wants to make America the Bitcoin and crypto capital of the world, that you can't be throwing guys in jail for writing open source code. And yes, people will say, well, they took the plea deal, they must be guilty. It's like, if you think that's how this whole thing works, then I don't know, I've got something to sell you. I don't know what.
It's very easy to tell someone else to be a martyr. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And the frustrating thing is that it's the whole fact that, and we don't have to get deep into this, but it is worth mentioning. I would always encourage people to go to billandkeone.org, sign that petition, make your voice heard, share it. It costs you nothing to do that. It's totally free to share this and get the message out there. But ultimately, these developer protections are so important because even in this case where Bill and Keone, where the Southern District of New York, the prosecutors brought this in front of FinCEN and said, hey, are these guys operating an unlicensed money transmitter business? FinCEN said, no, they're not, because they're not taking custody of customer funds at any point. That's our line in the sand for this. So nope, they're good. They brought the charges against them anyway, threw the whatever book at them, even though the people in charge of saying who's a money transmitter said they're not a money transmitter. And they went ahead with prosecution anyway and withheld that until 6 months into the case. And so this should make just not even Bitcoiners, not even privacy advocates, this should make any American, it should get you riled up, because this is ultimately just a perversion of the justice system in my mind. And I think that's why this part of the market structure bill with the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act is so important to get out there, because we need these sorts of protections to be enshrined clearly in law, because right now developers are being put in and honestly just quite disheartening to see.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't like. I think there's a lot of like talk about national security issues, and why this is a national security issue. But a lot of the staffers, they're just stuck in the narrowest interpretation of what national security means. National security is also economic development. It's also social development. There's a lot. National security is not just being able to surveil and control something. It's being able to build a functioning economy, a functioning financial system. There's a lot more to it than just we can trace wallets. I the discussions every day with staffers, like having them open their eyes. And this is the interesting part, Walker. Like you people working in national security, like over the Pentagon, policymakers, the National Security Council, they kind of get the larger version of national security. Like this is about economic competition. This is about monetary rails. This is about making sure that we maintain certain advantages that are good for the United States and our allies. Certainly that parallel our values. Thinking about national security just as your ability to trace and seize something is the most parochial, narrowest view of it. And some staffers are open to it, some aren't. But there are advocates, law enforcement advocates on the Hill that are like, no, we need to be able to do that. And this is in both parties, right? This is not just, it's probably more prominent among some Democrats, but it's not, it's a bipartisan problem. And to your point, we're also trying to let the rest of the privacy community know that once you set that precedent, it could just be, it could be a crypto developer today, but once you set the precedent of being able to prosecute people for writing software, it easily drifts into other things like AI or whatever, right? This is about a principle is code speech. And if we give way on that, well, I think you're opening up a Pandora's box.
I completely agree. And it's one of the reasons I'm so glad you guys are out there advocating for this. And people should advocate as well. When people, they may think, well, does calling my elected representative do anything? Well, it might. Like it does move the needle when they get flooded with calls all saying, hey, this is an important issue to us. That's what, when their staffers tell them, hey, we've gotten 100 calls today saying that this particular provision is really important. They realize, that's something that's going to, even from a social media perspective, that's something that if I say something good about this on national television, that gets clipped, that gets thrown out there. Like we live in an age where memetics is so powerful from a communication standpoint. It's always been, but now it's just so much easier to distribute those kind of mimetic influences. And really, you never know what makes a difference. You never know what moves the needle. And
That's
so
right.
I would encourage people to take that step. We do have to cut to a quick commercial break, and then I've got a bunch more questions for you, Ken. I want to talk about kind of upcoming midterms and some of the maybe what may or may not happen during those, and then what could be the results after that, as well as just some of the government's handling of the Bitcoin that they have seized. There was the case with the U.S. Marshal's office and this insider who it's a whole story. We'll get into it. We'll go to a commercial. We'll go to a commercial break first, so I don't get too into it beforehand. So stay tuned. We'll be right back here on RoxomTV with Ken Egan from the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Don't touch that dial. We will be right back.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the center of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're traveling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed two brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. I am Walker America, here with you every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The price of Bitcoin is $87,946, infinitely printable US dollars per Bitcoin. I'm here with Ken Egan. He's the Director of Government Affairs at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. And Ken, we've talked a little bit about the kind of some of the existing legislation right now, some of the things that are being worked through the halls of Congress. One thing I'd like to get your take on, though, is we talked a bit as well about the difference between the prior administration under Biden or whomever was signing things and the Trump administration. But what I'm wondering here is, I mean, obviously politics is it's a pendulum, right? Especially in a two-party duopoly in a Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola democracy like we have in the United States. And that pendulum tends to swing back rather drastically. So what I'd kind of love to know here is, what are your thoughts and how is kind of BPI preparing for a potentially, let's say, antagonistic setup in Congress, or after these midterms here coming up, or in the White House after the next election in a couple of years? How do you guys factor this into it? How are you kind of working to bring in more stakeholders from the left? Because sadly, even though Bitcoin is not partisan, Bitcoin has been made partisan by some people. Bitcoin's political, money's political, but it's not partisan, right? It's not a left-right thing. It's not a red-blue thing. It's a fix the money thing. So how do you guys prepare for that? How do you make sure that all of the hard work that you guys do doesn't get kind of wiped back by an antagonistic administration if they come in?
About that every day. And of course, the easy, obvious answer is we talk to both parties. I think I found the Democrats are very receptive to the idea. I kind of walk them through the origins of Bitcoin. I explain to them how, Bitcoin's origins are in the great financial crisis, Occupy Wall Street, 2008. This is where this protocol was born. And these are theoretically values that should align with Democratic Party. So we spend a lot of time talking to Democrats, letting them know that this is a big tent, and the Bitcoin it's a big rowdy tent, right? But it is a big tent, and Bitcoin is for anyone and everyone. And I do think, Walker, there is a generally pro Bitcoin bipartisan consensus in Congress. You have like, not everybody is like Cynthia Lummis in the Senate or Nick Begich in the House, if only. But there are also members, who are, who just, they don't. It's not as important for them. You look at someone like Nick Begich, where he's been a Bitcoiner for a long time, so he has deeper conviction and just a better understanding of what this protocol offers. But then you have sort of members. I think for example, the market structure. The good thing that came out of it was you saw someone like Senator Alston-Brooks, a Democrat from Maryland, a freshman senator, who I think is demonstrated that she is open to this technology. She hears from her constituents that it's important, and she thinks it has a role. And she actually took some risks and actually very bravely waded into this discussion, and offered a compromise solution on stablecoin yield. And it wasn't Bitcoin focused, but I think she's an example of a member of the Democratic Party who sees value in this. And of course, you have Senator Gillibrand from New York, Senator Wyden from Oregon, who have a longer history in being friends of the industry. So that's part of it. And I think, secondly, you have to remember, as bad as Biden was, it was all regulatory enforcement. There were no, Elizabeth Warren tried to pass her DAMLA Act, which is the, if you can imagine, the antithesis of the Blockchain Return Certainty Act. It was DAMLA, but it never went anywhere, thank God. But also all the anti-digital asset policies were all regulatory, SEC, banking. So it sort of underscores the importance of actually passing laws. And it's like the hardest thing to do in DC because Congress is just it's not fast. You got a taste of it. It takes a long time to get bills passed. So that does underscore the need to actually pass favorable legislation. Because as I tell Bitcoiners who are skeptical, and they're right to be skeptical about why do you even bother? Bitcoin is resistance money, but I think the people who use it as resistance money would rather not have to use it as resistance money. They'd rather be able to use it as a savings technology, as digital capital, for all the things we all get to use it for in the West, certainly in the United States. I think people that are forced to use it because they have no other alternatives would much rather be able to use it in the way that we use Bitcoin. Thus, it's important that we pass laws that enshrine our ability to do so. But it really is it is a function of constant outreach, and a lot of that outreach, though, is not just me and like Connor Brown, our head of strategy, who just joined us from Senator Lummis's office. A lot of you probably know Connor. It's not just he and I walking around Capitol Hill or walking around DC. It really is Bitcoiners, engaging with the representatives. And I think, Walker, you saw this. Like, it seems so far away, but all of a sudden, you walk through one door and you're shaking hands with a senator, and you're talking to staffers, and it seems far away, and all of a sudden, you just walk the hallway, you walk into a door, and you're talking to staffers about the stuff, and they're listening to you, they're taking notes. They might not like it, but they're doing it. So I think it's as remote as some of the politics. A lot of the machinations of DC are far away and they're arcane and they're moved. But the politics are very, very real, especially in election year. This is like, if you ever were inclined as a Bitcoiner to call your senator and say, hey, by the way, listen, I'm a voter and I support the Blockchain Return Certainty Act or whatever else, you'd be surprised. Any year, this is when they listen to you. So people shouldn't hesitate to do that. Even if you're a member, even if you live in Massachusetts and your senator is Elizabeth Warren, you should still do that. Because nothing else, it lets them know that, like, what you're doing you do not represent all of the people of Massachusetts, for example, on this issue. So I can't emphasize that enough. It's very, very important. One of the things I love to do is hook up members with Bitcoin, with bit devs and meetups. They go, like, they will send staff to a Bitcoin meetup in a state. You tell them there are 25 people that show up once a month to talk about this stuff. That's interesting to them because 25 people that could be hundreds of votes when you think about it, right? And these are motivated people. So clearly we want to talk to 25 voters once a month if we can. Not everyone, but they'll show up to these things. So there's an appetite for it. And this is any year, this is the year to get past that hesitation and to either send an email or call and be polite about it. I've sat in offices and heard through the phone like people being screamed at. It's not. You're probably talking to a 25-year-old staffer, just have a little bit of mercy on them, but tell them what you think. Don't hold back, but just do it politely. But back to your initial question, it is about we need to continue outreach to both parties, and that there is a lot of politics in DC, but as we're not an interest group, we represent our perspective on Bitcoin. We don't represent Bitcoin; no one does. But we present to them policies that I think 90% of Bitcoiners would probably agree are good, and we do that in the hope that they are educated and thus act accordingly when they're thinking about writing laws and policies.
Yeah, I would like to point out that I have been on the end of some of that yelling, but it was coming from a senator. That was a different story, though. That was quite. I think I filled you in on that one. We don't need to rehash it here. But I was pleasantly surprised at the receptiveness of some staffers, even the acknowledgement by one staffer that shall remain unnamed. I don't want to get this person in trouble, but mentioning that their particular representative that they worked for was so aged that really her opinion on the subject of Bitcoin didn't matter because she wasn't going to be in office very much longer because she, so I was like, well, I appreciate your honesty there. So
I've had frank conversations with that. That's pretty frank. But again, it's illustrative of how, these are still humans, and these, a lot of these staffers are young. If we talk a lot about the generational gap among Bitcoiners, if you're talking to a staffer who's 26-year-old, Gen Z or millennial, their future, the way they see their financial future is a lot different than anything I do. And they're a lot more open to this stuff, whether or not the person they work for supports it or not.
Right. No, I think it's a very good point to bring up there. I want to ask as well, just as it relates to kind of, if we zoom out a little, you talked about the fact that it's very important to get these bills actually passed, passed into law, not just have the executive orders, because of course executive orders can be, papered over the next time, right? So as it relates to kind of the strategic, geopolitical, national security importance of Bitcoin, it seems that this administration has a grasp of that. I mean, it seems that even Treasury Secretary Bessent has a pretty good grasp of that, and certainly other members of the administration. I'm wondering though, okay, do you think that there's actually a reasonable chance of getting kind of the SBR executive order codified into law prior to the end of this administration? Because, I have to worry that if that is not done, there's a pretty good chance that in just a reactionary move, let's say we get a blue wave in the midterms, let's say that we've got a blue administration next time around, that there may be just a kind of a knee-jerk reactionary move to try and claw back everything that Trump had his hands on, and that could actually be something that's incredibly detrimental to the national security of the United States as it relates to holding the Bitcoin that we have seized. And you can have whatever opinion on that, but we have it now, right? So, I mean, what do you think the chances are of actually getting something like that through, or is it one of those things where we're just going to have to wait and see how many people you can kind of get on the side of sanity here as it relates to, the government's position on Bitcoin?
So I think the idea of the government buying Bitcoin is just we're not there yet. But that doesn't mean that there is not, I think, a possible consensus on the government actually holding Bitcoin. And like you said, I know a lot of Bitcoiners are uncomfortable with how the government's acquired the Bitcoin it has. But a different discussion. I know, for example, Congressman Begich, and every Bitcoiner needs to follow Congressman Nick Begich from Alaska. He is a freshman congressman, but a leader on Bitcoin in the House of Representatives. He's a true Bitcoiner. He's a wonderful guy, and so he is definitely pleased. You need to follow Nick Begich. But he's drafting a bill. He's got a bill called the American Reserve Modernization Act. That bill would essentially codify the executive order and allow the Treasury to keep Bitcoin on its balance sheet. Very important. and then it's a law, and then all of a sudden whether or not you have a friendly president in the White House, there is a legal requirement to maintain the Bitcoin. And what it also does, though, and I think this is a problem, there's Bitcoin all over this town. All kinds of agencies get their hands on it for different reasons. Theoretically, when it goes through legal process, the U.S. Marshals are the custodian. But as you probably saw this week, there's a story of allegedly, I don't know this, but allegedly, the son of the owner of a government contractor, and all the stuff is government contractors, right? But the son of a government contractor allegedly, maybe, was involved in the theft of crypto assets that the government held, allegedly. So we'll see. There'll be an investigation, obviously. But that does speak to the need to have some kind of. I mean, we're talking about a lot of money. These are assets of the United States, and there needs to be some accountability for how they're held and how they're accounted for. Congress Baggage's bill would do that. It would provide requirements for custody. It would provide reporting requirements. The Treasury would have to inform Congress periodically. This is how much we have. This is where it is. To bring, to bring basic accounting procedures and basic security procedures to the holding of this asset. So we're optimistic that bill, whether or not you believe that the appeal for a bill like that is a lot broader than, we should sell all of the gold in Fort Knox, whether there's one bar or a lot of bars, whatever it is. Hopefully there's more. But we should sell all the gold in Fort Knox and buy Bitcoin. There's just no appetite for that. But there is appetite for some kind of accountability in how the government stores this asset, and accountability to Congress. I mean, the best reception I get was I get a lot of like okays. We tell them it also requires congressional reporting. Oh yes, Congress has a role here. Congress does have a role here. You theoretically hold the purse, so you should maybe exercise that authority in a responsible way. So we're hopeful that Congressman Baggage's bill maybe can appeal across the aisle. Makes sense. It codifies the president's executive order, but more importantly, it brings some accountability to the custody process, which obviously based on what you saw in this story possibly is surely needed. Either way, even if that story is fake, there still needs to be accountability for how these assets are held by the government.
Yeah, that story is quite interesting.
Wild.
And I mean, it's just so ridiculous, but it's also not necessarily surprising, right? I mean, sadly, and that's the thing. I mean, it would not be the first time that a sweetheart contract deal has been granted, even though the other bids were better, and it was a favorable deal was given, and then that deal was abused. I mean, in this case, it just seems again quite absurd, but also pretty darn believable, sadly. And I think that's the thing that people really don't. This doesn't instill confidence in the government's ability to actually safeguard what it has through its confiscatory measures. So let's see. I mean, we're going to be following this story closely on here, just because it's again ridiculous if this is the case, and one has to wonder, what the heck is actually going on there? Who knew about this? Who's taken a piece of the pie there? And how often does this actually happen that we're just maybe not aware of this?
Right.
Because you don't have somebody's son live streaming on Telegram, showing off their wallet to people. I mean, it's all just so insane. It's truly like soap opera
It makes perfect sense for 2026, but yeah, it's insane. It's crazy. I saw that. And the guy who did the reporting, a guy named Zach XPT, he's a well-known crypto investigator, and he's got a good reputation. I think he works for Paradigm now. I think he's got on his X bio, but he's been around a long time, and he's well respected. So I mean, he wouldn't be putting this stuff out if he didn't think it was credible, and he knows what he's doing. So, but it's great.
Yeah.
It's a crazy story. Like I'm imagining the kid opening a drawer in his dad's office and finding the 12 words. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah. And we're talking about again, a lot of money. We're talking about $40 million that was, again, allegedly taken. And I guess the guy's dad owns this CMDSS, currently has this active IT contract. And I mean, again, the awarding of that contract also seems a little bit weird from what I saw in some of Zach's posts as well. And it's all very, very fishy. Maybe it's not real, but the fact that it's so easy to believe that it is. And again, Zach has done very good reporting on this kind of stuff before. That's he's putting his reputation on the line by making these kind of claims. So again, I think there's a pretty good chance. Right now, we'll say alleged, just so that we don't get sued by
All
somebody.
fairness, we should. Yes.
Yeah, but and we should absolutely. But let's see. And I mean, again, it's like, boy, Bitcoin self-custody is hard. It gets even harder when you've got a lot of people who potentially have the keys to the kingdom there. And apparently it's allegedly possible for even people, sons of contractors, to get access to that. So I mean, it doesn't instill a ton of confidence, Ken.
No, and $40 million, like even it's still a lot of money, even though, I know we only talking billions now, but it's still a lot of money.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. To any normal person, it's a lot. But if we're talking government spending, it's a drop in the bucket, right?
Yes.
I want to be conscious of your time, Ken, because I know you have a hard stop here in 5 minutes. Maybe I would just kind of zoom out a little bit further here and just think kind of as we look at the state of Bitcoin nation state adoption more broadly, as we look at the world stage, obviously gold has been catching a massive bid, a lot of that driven initially by central bank buying of it, one would assume. But you see this kind of this dynamic emerging where China and Russia are, our frenemies have quite a lot of gold. The U.S. allegedly has a lot of gold. We still don't know. All that Fort Knox stuff kind of went away after Trump was talking about it pretty publicly, and then
a lot of allegedly in our discussion today, Walker. A lot of allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. But I mean, how does BPI think about just positioning for, let's say, American superiority in the Bitcoin realm in the long term? Is this something where it's truly believed that like the government really needs to continue having a pro stance on this? Is the grassroots ownership of Bitcoin, because American Bitcoiners, individuals and companies own the most Bitcoin of anyone in the world, right? Setting the governments aside. So how necessary is the government buy-in, kind of an acceptance of this, to still maintain that edge for America? Or is it more important that we still just focus on the individual adoption, focus on corporate adoption, and okay, the government's going to do what it's going to do. It's going to swing back and forth every 4 years, and hey, we throw up our hands a little bit.
And interesting, in China, for example, you can't technically own Bitcoin, but you can own gold, right? And clearly, there's a corollary there to Bitcoin in the United States. So we at BPI 100% believe we still need to focus on individual adoption. I think this protocol at its essence is hard coded to for individual sovereignty. So I think a lot of we do a lot of discussions on the policy side about why Bitcoin's role as a in a new age of monetary competition, the role it can play for the United States. But on the legislative side, the BRCA, for example, is all about people, all about individuals. So that's going to remain the core of what we do and what we focus on. But on the policy side, yes, I 100% believe we need to continue encouraging the government to adopt this technology. If we're looking for where we have this week this has been a great week to discuss this, because you've watched what's happening in dollar markets. What's happening in global FX markets, right? The dollar is, I think, being deliberately weakened, because that needs to happen if we are going to sort of unwind ourselves out of this cycle of deindustrialization that we've been in since, pick your time, 50 years. So that does call for the emergence of a global neutral reserve asset. And there's a choice here, right? You have an asset that actually gives us competitive advantage, but it also is parallel with our values. I hear a lot of the gold bugs, like gold is not, I have a problem with gold. Like it's epigenic, right? It's kind of in our skin. We've been dealing with it for thousands of years as human beings. But it is extractive, right? Gold mining is dirty. It does terrible things to people who live near gold mines, for example. Bitcoin, I think we're finally past the Bitcoin mining FUD. But at its core, though, what we live in a digital age where money is increasingly digital. We're talking about trying to advance dollarization through digital dollars. What is the most seamless, most effective way for people to store a neutral reserve asset digitally? Not gold. Nobody owns gold. I saw something today, it was in Bloomberg, that 98% of people that own gold don't actually own gold. They own paper gold. And that's fine for your portfolio, right? And it's great if you have that in your IRA and your IRA is going up and gold's ripping and it's great. I think it's wonderful. People making money on that stuff. But when the day comes and you need actual physical custody, not going to happen. And again, it's not practical that somebody outside of where we live is going to have gold coins. Nobody can afford to buy. You can't buy $100 worth of gold. You can't slowly accumulate physical gold. It doesn't work that way. And back to the individual side. But on the global monetary competition side, states are going to increasingly look for alternatives to treasury holdings. I think gold is almost matched foreign central bank holdings at this point now. It's closer depending on who you ask, but there's certainly neck and neck. That is a clear evolution of the monetary system. And which system provides advantage to the United States? China's not just buying gold; they're building an entire settlement system around gold. The Shanghai Gold Exchange is not just a gold vault; it is a network that allows countries to trade with China in yuan and buy and swap gold in Shanghai. And they're building vaults in Hong Kong, and I think they're building a vault in Riyadh. This is not just about gold. This is about building a parallel system that, frankly, we just don't enjoy competitive advantage in that. And again, gold is if you own gold, yes, you are a sovereign holder of gold, but no one owns gold. It's hard to own gold. It's hard to buy gold. A lot of states don't have the mechanisms to store gold, or they store it in New York City or in Shanghai. Not great for your sovereignty. So which protocol is digital? Which protocol allows you to hold self-custody an asset that has historically and will continue to beat depreciation of fiat currency? That's Bitcoin. And Bitcoin offers so much more though than just that. We could do another hour on Bitcoin mining and infrastructure development in the global South, whether that's in Africa or Latin America. What Bitcoin looks like as a franchised tool over the next 10 years. I think, to me, even we had this debate, inside stuff. Connor always tells me, don't look at the price. I obsessively look at the price. I can't help it. Not because I care, but it's just what I work in Bitcoin. It's what I do. It's what I do. But if you're looking for a way and the price, doesn't necessarily matter. It does matter a little bit. But if you're looking for a way for states to actually accumulate wealth in a sovereign way, in a new system, smaller states, which simply can't be competitive on gold markets, well, I think we'll look to Bitcoin, and it makes sense from a policy perspective. So yeah, for us, a lot of our brain power is focused on that. Bitcoin as a tool of both monetary competition, but also economic development in different parts of the world where the United States needs to maintain relationships. We're in a sort of a bumpy time right now. But at the end of the day, we're still going to have trading partners. We're still going to have alliances. We're still going to need certain parts of the world to prosper. Not also just because it's the right thing to do, but that's just the nature of things. And I challenge anyone to see how the United States, how a increasingly globalized gold network will help the United States achieve those goals, and how, as opposed to what China's doing, and why that's better than Bitcoin. I just haven't seen an argument for it. Again, I remind myself that this protocol is still 15, 16 years old, so I'm patient. But the advantage is, and I'll tell you the truth is, there are some people. We joke on the Virginia side of the river, right? That's where sort of the whole national security establishment is. They're thinking really hard about this because they understand what China's doing, and they're looking for competitive advantage. And Bitcoin comes up time and time again. And we're asked constantly to provide feedback on ideas and what can Bitcoin do here? What's Bitcoin's role in development and this and that? Which would lead you to believe that there are people who understand that. So I'm really confident, and this is a lot of what we're going to focus on. We're going to continue focusing on, of course, the legal issues, because we have to, because this is at its core, Bitcoin's pure essence. It is, for you and me, it is a tool of sovereignty. But it also will and increasingly play a role in international politics. So this is a lot what we're doing at BPI.
Well, Ken, I appreciate that. And I've kept you a little long, but I'm going to blame that one on you because that was a great riff there at the end.
You got me going. Ken, it's my jam talking about this.
I love it. And I love the work that you guys do. I would encourage everybody to follow. You're now at Bitcoin Policy on X. You guys got that very nice handle there. btcpolicy.org to find out more of what you guys are doing. You have your summits that come up. People can check those out as well. I really enjoyed going to the last one. That was an illuminating experience and just gave me a lot more respect for the work that you guys do, which again was already high. But Ken, thank you so much for joining. Again, folks should check out. You can check out. I've tagged Ken on my X account there. You'll be able to see him there. It's Bayman1111. Is that right?
11771. So yeah, okay. It's my little call sign, and I'm from Oyster Bay, New York, which is
Okay.
mistaken. So 11771 is the zip code for Oyster Bay, New York. So
There you go.
That's the mystery.
Okay. Ken Egan, Director of Government Affairs at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Ken, thank you so much for joining. Really was a pleasure, and excited for this weekly Bitcoin policy roundup we're going to be doing here on RoxomTV every Tuesday. So guys, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we are going to have Merch, who's going to come back here on RoxomTV. He was on last week as well, but we're going to be talking about some new BIPs. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin and quantum and a whole lot more. Stay tuned. We'll be right back here on RoxomTV.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin! Come on, little buddy! Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. My name is Walker America. I'm here with you every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The price of Bitcoin is 88,223 infinitely printable US dollars per Bitcoin. We just heard from Ken Egan from the Bitcoin Policy Institute just before the break here. And now it's my pleasure to bring up on stage Murch. Murch is the co-founder and lead contributor at Local Host Research. Murch, how you doing? We're going to be talking about BIPs, about quantum, about whatever else comes up. But how's it going?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. Better now, Murch. I want to maybe let's start out with BIP3 because Bitcoin really just did kind of this quiet upgrade in the way it upgrades itself. Not everybody pays attention to this stuff, but it is really important stuff that's happening in the background that really makes sure that Bitcoin kind of keeps functioning the way it does, and in terms of the actual governance of the protocol, that it's maintained in a responsible way. And this was over 2 years worth of drafting, back and forth debate and review, and now BIP3 is live. It's replaced the old and increasingly broken, I think, BIP2 process that governed how the Bitcoin improvement proposals are submitted, reviewed, and tracked. So really, it's kind of a meta BIP at the end of the day. But it's the first major overhaul of the BIP process since 2016. And really kind of it matters because if Bitcoin development stalls, if the process stalls, well, the development stalls with it. So can you give us kind of just an overview of what is BIP3? Why does it matter? Why did it take kind of so long to get this thing finally pushed through?
Right. You described it pretty well already. It is a BIP about BIPs. It defines the process on how we talk about ideas to improve the protocol, the Bitcoin protocol or Bitcoin network. We also have some informational BIPs that describe events that happened, such as a network split in 2013. And otherwise, it's mostly just describing features of wallets that need to be interoperable or other node software Bitcoin projects in a easy to find central location where people can just submit their ideas and proposals. So yes, as you said, that used to be regulated by BIP2, another Bitcoin improvement proposal, and now is guided by BIP3, which just deployed last week, maybe 2 weeks by now.
Okay, no, I appreciate the overview. And I think this is one of those things that people may not, it's like, okay, this is, again, kind of a meta BIP. It's a BIP about BIPs. Why does this stuff even matter? But I think it's really an important development here, kind of on the background, just because this is such a crucial part. Obviously, we've seen kind of, there's been obviously a lot of contention around let's say the Bitcoin development process more broadly this year. That's something that I think has been pretty well drained in terms of a topic. But I mean, is this something that sort of really improves that overall? Does it kind of increase transparency in some ways? Is it really just procedural in the background? Kind of what do you see as the kind of the positives coming out of this as we go forward?
Yeah, I think that it makes it slightly less bureaucratic. Hopefully, BIPs can move a little faster. We've reduced the amount of statuses that BIPs can have, which makes it just simpler to be in the right status and fewer updates over the life cycle of a BIP. We've allowed BIPs to have made some sections of the BIP format optional. We've moved some of the decisions to the authors. So the authors basically say, this is ready for draft when there's no open review and it had some amount of interaction with reviewers and community discussion, and it looks somewhat semi-complete. Then when the authors are ready to publish it as a draft, it's mostly the decision of the authors, with some input of the BIP editors, of course, that things are ready to be published. And so hopefully we continue on this journey. The BIP process had ground to a halt about 2 years ago. There were a couple of attempts on restarting it, and then in April 2 years ago, 2024, we added several new BIP editors. Since then, we've gone through several hundred open pull requests in the repository that made updates or introduced new proposals. I think there have been some 35 or so numbers assigned to new BIPs since then, and a bunch of those published. So yeah, it's just trying to streamline the process a little bit. The abstract idea is pretty much still the same. We start with an idea. When people want to propose something new, they should please contact the mailing list, describe their idea on a high level. When they get encouraging feedback, they might write up an early draft, share that with the mailing list again, and then they would start working on a formal document where they specify exactly how the code changes would be implemented in order for the feature to be interoperable between different implementations, and describe the motivation for this BIP, how it applies to multiple projects. We don't really need BIPs for things that only apply to a single project. And then add test vectors, add a reference implementation, add rationale comparing different approaches that could have solved the same problem. And once that sort of is all there, they get a BIP number, and it's published in the BIPs repository.
Okay. I appreciate the additional context there. And kind of as we transition out of that, talking about some of the, okay, let's talk about some of the things that are actually going on right now in Bitcoin development outside of sort of this really procedural streamlining here. Can you talk about some of the things that are coming in upcoming releases here? I know cluster mempool was one that you mentioned. Maybe we could get into a little bit of what that is, why it matters, and anything else kind of going on that you think is really relevant for people to know about.
Right. So the mempool is, of course, the waiting room for unconfirmed transactions. And different projects implement this differently, but Bitcoin Core implements this as a data structure called the mempool. And in this mempool, we only have transactions that are not in conflict with each other. So for example, if there's a replacement of a transaction with a higher fee rate, it would bump out the predecessor, the original transaction. And so basically, most people don't need to know how everything works under the hood in the mempool. They just need to know it's this list of all of the available candidate transactions that could be included in blocks. But this was organized previously in form of ancestor sets. So for every transaction, we would remember all of the predecessor transactions that are also still unconfirmed. So if you spend an output from a previous transaction, that is a parent transaction, and the transaction that is spending this parent's output is the child transaction. So we would remember transactions in the context of their ancestry. And there were some inefficiencies there that made it more expensive to calculate what, for example, would be evicted if the mempool overflows. And we struggled with implementing package relay. And cluster mempool as just how, so cluster mempool basically refurbishes all of how mempool works under the hood. From the user perspective, hopefully there will be hardly any change. There's a few small changes that we'll talk about in a minute, but basically we just took out the whole plumbing and re-architected how under the hood we organize this waiting room for unconfirmed transactions.
Sorry, I was muted. What are some of those smaller points that you mentioned that were kind of some of the changes that maybe users would notice?
So we had two policies that already applied to unconfirmed transactions previously that are obsolete now. So previously, we did not allow transactions to have more than 25 ancestors or more than 25 descendants. And this limit is now replaced with the cluster limit. So maybe to explain what a cluster is in the first place, every transaction belongs to exactly one cluster, and that is the set of transactions that are related to each other in some way. So a parent and a child are in the same cluster together, but also if the parent has other parents, those would be in the cluster. Or if some of those parents have other children, so cousins, so to speak, of your transaction, those would all be in the same cluster. So everything that is related via child or parent relationships transitively is part of one cluster. Clusters are now limited to 64 transactions, or will be limited when this rolls out with Bitcoin Core 31. And the size limit or weight limit is still the same. So the virtual size is limited to 101 kiloVbyte per cluster, where it previously was limited to 101 kiloVbyte for the whole ancestor set or the whole descendant set.
Okay.
So if you make a ton of transactions that are all unconfirmed and related to each other, you might bump into a different limit now. But either way, you should probably look into how you're building your transactions.
For sure. One of the other topics that I know you wanted to get into was around private broadcast, which you said has been in the works for quite some time. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, so this is a new option for Bitcoin Core nodes. And the idea is where previously when you create a transaction and you would broadcast it, you would basically just send it to your outbound peers. So when your node has multiple connections, it would preferably just hand this new transaction to peers it selected itself. And then the peers would put it in their mempool and would broadcast it to its peers in turn. So this way, the unconfirmed transaction would gossip through the network. Now, there is an issue where network surveillance that make a ton of connections would probably have connections to almost every node on the network. And when they first see a transaction appear on the network, they might be able to pinpoint which node originally broadcast that. And that would link the IP address of a node with this new unconfirmed transactions and would very heavily imply that the node is related to the sender of the transaction because it probably originated it. So the idea behind private broadcast is that instead of sending the transaction to our neighbors, to the peers that we have connections to, we make a ephemeral brief connection to a node through Tor. And then we just basically handshake, give it that single new transaction that we want to submit to the network, make a ping and pong, and disconnect. So by using Tor to connect to some other random node in the network, we basically decouple the origination of the transaction from our node because, yes, sure, this other Tor node knows what connection they made, but we're a Tor node. And then we just have hopefully the transaction appear somewhere else in the network from the node that first saw it, who we submitted it to via Tor. So if this doesn't happen because the first connection black holed our announcement, we'll make multiple of these ephemeral Tor connections and just submit our transactions that way to several nodes on the network until we see it organically returned to us by one of our peers. So as the transaction is introduced anywhere in the network, those nodes will gossip it to its peers, and eventually it'll flood back to us. And once we see it, we pretend that it is a new transaction to us and broadcast it to all of our peers, just the same way as any other transaction we'd seen. But previously, we only remember which peers we sent it to in our peer manager, and it doesn't appear in our own mempool. So we will behave as if we had never seen it before. So this is predominantly to keep the information where a transaction was introduced into the network more private. And I assume that a lot of people will be running this once it comes out with version 31.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds great. And I think you mentioned at the start, just in terms of some of these chain analysis tools and things like that, they right now have pretty good ways of extrapolating. Okay, we're pretty sure this came from here. We can see the IP address. There's a lot you can do with that, right? And we're talking about very sophisticated actors in these cases, but even less sophisticated actors could probably do quite a lot with that information. This is really just it's an overall huge boost to just transactional privacy and just the privacy of your node for anyone running the software, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. No, I mean it sounds like a fantastic development there. Is there anything else kind of upcoming in terms of new features that you think for View 31 that you'd like to inform people about, or are those kind of the two larger ones that you wanted to highlight?
Well, I wouldn't call those large features, but those are two of the ones that I find exciting right now. Obviously, the 31 release is also still a few months out. We're aiming for April for that one. Bitcoin Core does two major releases per year, April and October. So there might be some more things until then, hopefully. There's some other exciting stuff that we still continue to work on. Work on silent payments is still in lipsec P world. Unfortunately, there were some interesting developments into faster IBD with SwiftSync. Generally, we've made lots of improvements on IBD speed lately, but SwiftSync in particular would promise to improve IBD times about 80%. So 5 times as fast, which would be immensely exciting, of course. But I'm not sure whether they will be in 31. So those are things we're working on, but well, I can't predict yet.
Yeah. Oh, another question for you. I know Bitcoin Core just got a new maintainer. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. About 3 weeks ago, the contributor Sedited, previously known as the Charlatan, was proposed as a maintainer. I believe he's been contributing since 2019 or so. He's the lead on the Bitcoin kernel project, which aims to pull out the consensus engine out of Bitcoin Core and make it available to other projects that also want to implement nodes or Electrum servers or similar projects. So the idea is if there were multiple implementations of the consensus code, it might be easier for there to appear a consensus split, a consensus failure between those implementations, because you'd basically have to be bug for bug compatible with Bitcoin Core, at least until Bitcoin Core is currently the basis of something like 95% of all nodes. So making complete new implementations of consensus might be dangerous if you want to rely on them for staying in sync with the network. This would be a lot easier, though, if we all used the same library to validate whether we're in consensus and process blocks and transactions. And that's essentially the idea behind Bitcoin kernel, is to pull out all the consensus relevant functions and functionality into one library that people can use to build their own Bitcoin project around, and maybe bootstrap a new node that under the hood uses the same kernel, but maybe has other features, different policies, or whatever people want to do differently in their Bitcoin nodes.
Okay. Very interesting. And, before, I know we've got a stop here in a couple of minutes, but I did want to ask you, what is localhost research that you are now co-founder and lead contributor of? Can you break that down?
Sure, yeah. So there's a few in-office Bitcoin Core contributor organizations. Localhost Research is one of those. We founded last year, early in the year. We've been here in the Bay Area in an office since, I think, April. We currently employ 4 full-time Bitcoin Core contributors. We work on open source stuff. We're a nonprofit, so we're completely donation funded. We have here Ava Chow, the wallet maintainer, David Gumberg, Santos, and myself. So we're naturally a little more focused on wallet things, and we also contribute to a lot of education projects and other Bitcoin Core matters.
Oh, fantastic. I want to, again, be conscious of your time here. I know we're running up to the end, but where can folks find out more information? Where do you want to send to people? Always appreciate you coming here on Roxom. Always good to catch up with you, Merch.
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm at Merchandamus. I try to weigh in on the topic of the day. And other than that, I appear on the Optech Recap every Tuesday. So this morning we recorded another podcast. If you're into what's going on in Bitcoin development, I think a great way of keeping abreast of things and getting an overview is to listen in on our podcast. So we summarize and discuss the content of the Bitcoin Optic newsletter that comes out every Friday. And today, for example, we had René Pickard on and talked about limitations of the Lightning Network and some mathematical modeling on liquidity in the Lightning Network and what limitations it has. So those are two good spots for myself. For localhost research, you can check out our website, lclhost.org. And if you have a lot of spare cash, well, Bitcoiners don't have couches, so you wouldn't have it there. But we are a nonprofit in the US, so if you donate, we can get you the tax documentation for that. And if you want to support Bitcoin development, we would appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I realize now that we forgot to talk about quantum. We got two laptops, but we're gonna have to save it because I know you're running short on time here. So we'll have to save it for another one because I do want to kind of go over with people. There's been a lot of quantum, let's say quantum FUD. I think there's a general understanding, or most people think that Bitcoin developers apparently are not paying attention to this, but the reality is that conversations have been happening and actions have been taken for quite some time. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that briefly before I get you out of here.
Sure, let me try to say something very briefly. So there's a number of different Bitcoin contributors that have been researching both post-quantum signature schemes or writing Bitcoin improvement proposals about post-quantum security. So there's the BIP360 coming out soon that tries to introduce a TypeScript based new output type that would be immune against long-range attacks, or at least until you reuse it. There has been a very big report on the likelihood of quantum coming soon and what we could do about it by some developers at Chaincode Labs and other places. There's been a bunch of research into signature schemes. There was a seminal paper recently by Jonas Nick and Mikhail Kudinov, I think, who looked into hash-based signature schemes, and a lot of work by the developer Conduition that has been optimizing the Sphinx implementation for more performance. So there's a bunch of conversations going on. If you're interested in that, please read the mailing list for those topics and maybe check out the BIP360. It's getting very close to being published, I think. So there are a few things happening. Personally, I also think that the time until quantum computers actually become a thing is sometimes underestimated by concerned parties. So yeah, we'll have to find a middle way between being prepared, addressing the concerns, and hopefully waiting long enough for post-quantum schemes to be efficient and small enough that they don't ruin all the dynamics in the Bitcoin network.
Oh, that was a great succinct recap there, so I appreciate it so much, Merch. Thanks for coming on here. Always great to pick your brain and get an update on what's happening in the Bitcoin development world. Thank you for all the work that you and the other developers and contributors, maintainers, and everybody else does. Appreciate it very much. We're going to go to a quick commercial break here, and then we'll be right back on RoxomTV. Make sure to follow Merch. Check out the podcast as well to stay updated on Bitcoin technical developments. And again, we're going to run to a quick commercial, then we'll be right back here on RoxomTV. Don't touch that dial, and thank you again, Merch.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
He's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. My name is Walker America. I am your host here on RoxomTV every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The price of Bitcoin right now is 88,364 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per Bitcoin. Great to be back here with you. Earlier in the program, we had Ken Egan, Director of Government Affairs at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, followed by Murch. He works on the Bitcoin development, Bitcoin protocol, and also some of the associated organizations there. We're going to get into a couple of world news stories, followed by a number of different Bitcoin stories and some news in that regard. We're going to start out first going over to Iran, where the protest death toll may far exceed official figures, according to a recent report. So the true number of people killed during Iran's recent protest crackdown may be far higher than officially acknowledged, with medical workers and witnesses estimating that deaths could exceed 30,000 people. The number is based on testimony from doctors, morgue workers, graveyard staff, and witnesses across multiple provinces who describe overwhelmed hospitals, bodies being transported in refrigerated trucks, and large-scale, hurried burials aimed at concealing the scale of the killings. One doctor, identified as Dr. Ahmadi, said he and a network of more than 80 medical professionals documented fatal injuries, including close-range gunshots and severe wounds, often targeting the head, chest, and genitals. He and his colleagues concluded that the official figures likely represent less than 10% of the actual deaths, suggesting a possible toll far beyond government estimates. While Iranian authorities have acknowledged more than 3,000 deaths, and the U.S.-based human rights activists news agency has verified over 6,000 deaths, with thousands more under review, doctors cited in the report believe the real figure may be closer to 22,000 to 33,000 or higher. Witnesses told The Guardian that morgues and cemeteries received hundreds or even thousands of bodies within days, with some facilities unable to store them. In several cases, staff said bodies were removed from official forensic systems and buried in mass graves, sometimes under pressure from authorities. Medical workers also reported signs of possible executions, including bodies with close-range head wounds and medical equipment still attached, suggesting that some victims were killed while under treatment. The investigation describes what doctors call a systematic effort to suppress evidence, including discouraging injured protesters from seeking hospital care, relocating corpses, and restricting documentation of causes of death. One doctor said these practices were designed to, quote, not only suppress protest, but to suppress memory. The Iranian government has not publicly responded in detail to the report's findings. Human rights groups say the investigation adds to growing international concern over the scale and severity of Iran's response to the protests, and the difficulty of independently verifying casualties amid internet shutdowns and tight state controls. Again, it is absolutely horrific what is happening over there. People are standing up and speaking out finally against this oppressive regime. Now, this is also a case where people are struggling to just afford basic necessities over there. So not only are they protesting the Sharia law that was foisted upon them after the Islamic Revolution, but they're also protesting the fact that their internet has been shut down, that their money buys them literally nothing now. We're now at 1.4 million Iranian rial to US dollar. The Iranian rial has gone absolutely parabolic, of course, in Bitcoin terms, because this is what it looks like when a currency hyperinflates and fails. There's a lot of factors playing into this over there. I don't think that we're going to, of course, ever get the true story from official government sources. That's, of course, not in their interest at all. They want to maintain the semblance of power that they have. They want to maintain the iron grip that they have on the people over there. And ultimately, it's going to be very interesting to see what international organizations, but more importantly, what foreign governments do about this. We now are going to have mountains of evidence that will get larger and larger, that the regime over there in Iran is executing its people, that it is, of course, suppressing information from getting outside amid these internet shutdowns. And it's a case where it's pretty obvious that they're trying to hide what is truly going on there as much as possible. They're also trying to prevent their citizens from communicating with each other to organize and share information, lest that information get out to the wider world and the true extent of their atrocities becomes evident. Applications like BitChat, a peer-to-peer Bluetooth mesh network private messaging app, have soared in popularity in Iran. And this is the same thing that we saw in Uganda in the leading up to the recent election, where the Ugandan regime also shut down internet access. This is a favorite tool of tyrannical regimes, of authoritarians, of totalitarians, of dictators who want to suppress their population. The first thing that you do is you cut off them from the internet, you stop their ability to communicate. This is why North Korea has never allowed its citizens to be connected to the internet, right? Lest they see just how horrible the nature of communism truly is when compared to the rest of the world, which does not live under the yoke of an oppressive communist regime. But in Iran, this is going to get a heck of a lot worse before it gets better, I think. The regime there obviously has no interest in relinquishing its power. They're not going to suddenly roll over and say, well, okay, guess we'll get rid of the Sharia law and, we'll liberate our populace. There's no chance in that happening. It's going to necessarily involve a heck of a lot more bloodshed, probably will involve various international forces coming in. Let's see. You would think that the United States was looking for any excuse to get boots on the ground there. I don't relish that happening, but you would also hope that of all the people that we've overthrown in our time as the United States, maybe it's maybe we should just one more regime change, right? Just one more, then we'll stop. We'll see what happens there, but ultimately, it's a tragedy for the people of Iran. It's a tragedy in terms of the loss of life. It's a tragedy in terms of the absolute economic destruction that is foisted upon those that are still living there. And again, this will get worse before it gets better. We'll be monitoring it closely here on RoxomTV, but at least there are some tools available to people in Iran and anywhere in the world where you have an oppressive and repressive regime that cuts off access to the internet. Tools like BitChat still allow people to communicate even in the darkest of times. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a story that was made the rounds on Bitcoin Twitter, Bitcoin X here this week, which is around a $40 million alleged insider theft that has really sparked Bitcoin custody fears at the U.S. government. Now, fresh concerns are emerging regarding how the U.S. government safeguards its Bitcoin after allegations that more than $40 million in seized digital assets were siphoned from wallets linked to the U.S. Marshal Service. The claims suggest insider access at a federal crypto custody contractor may have been exploited. According to the report, the alleged theft centers on Command Services and Support, CMDSS, a Virginia-based firm awarded a USMS contract in late 2024 to manage and dispose of certain seized crypto assets. Those assets reportedly included funds tied to high-profile criminal cases, including Bitcoin seized from the 2016 Bitfinex hack. On-chain analysis indicates tens of millions of dollars were briefly removed from government-linked wallets, with some funds still unaccounted for. The allegations intensified after a private Telegram dispute surfaced online, showing an individual known as Lick screen sharing a wallet holding millions in crypto and moving funds in real time. Now, these claims, which were first surfaced by blockchain investigator Zach XBT, were posted on X. And you can see here he says, in case you are curious how John DeGita Lick was able to steal $40 million plus from U.S. government seizure addresses, John's dad owns CMDSS, which currently has an active IT government contract in Virginia. CMDSS was awarded the contract to assist the U.S. Marshal Service in managing / disposing of seized forfeited crypto assets. It still remains unclear at this point how John obtained access from his dad. Again, allegedly. But boy, this is just a truly absurd case. So this controversy really reignited broader criticism of federal Bitcoin custody practices. David Bailey, CEO of Nakamoto, warned that Treasury should immediately secure private keys away from the Justice Department to prevent further losses, with estimates suggesting that the U.S. government controls roughly 200,000 Bitcoin or more. Even limited custody failures could expose billions of dollars in Bitcoin to risk. If insiders can allegedly move millions from government wallets with little detection, current custody systems may be fundamentally broken. As the federal government Bitcoin stockpile grows and Bitcoin becomes increasingly strategic, this episode reinforces a truth Bitcoiners have long understood, that custody is everything, not your keys, not your coins. And at the end of the day here, it's a great example of, without government, who will get a sweetheart contract deal and then allegedly have their son steal a bunch of Bitcoin that was confiscated. I mean, without government, what would we possibly do here? We absolutely, of course, need them to build the roads and tax us into oblivion and mishandle seized assets that have strategic importance. This story is honestly just so absurd. When I saw this, it just seems like something that's truly parody. It's so blatant. Again, this is all alleged at this point. Let's see what happens. But Zach XBT has been a pretty rock solid investigator when it comes to these sorts of hacks, or in this case, just outright thefts. I don't think there was any hacking involved from the sounds of it. But let's see what plays out. Either way, this is just a great example of the fact that, you know what, the folks who are in charge of a massive, shocking amount of money aren't necessarily the best at keeping track of it. It's amazing how carefree and careless you can be when you're holding and responsible for other people's money. And this case just goes on to exemplify the fact that there is so much, again, alleged in this case, but we all know that there's a massive amount of fraud, corruption, waste, and abuse throughout all levels of the government. This isn't just at the federal level, the federal government contractors. This is all the way down to the state and local levels. Anywhere that there is political influence, that there is power to be had, there will be abuses of that power for personal gain. We've seen this. We see this playing out right now in Minnesota with all of the massive amounts of fraud that have been uncovered there. Now, this isn't something that's exclusive or unique to Minnesota, of course. I'm sure that we will find ungodly amounts of fraud, waste, and abuse in every single state, in probably every single county, in every single town, right? Again, when you have a centralized group of people who have the ability to benefit from their power, it's often people that directly want to benefit from and abuse that system that find themselves in those positions, because the rest of us who don't have a desire to steal from our fellow citizens in a completely, legal way, don't really tend to go for those types of positions of power. But we'll see what happens in this case. I'm certainly going to be following it closely because, again, it is just so dang absurd. Let's see what happens. At this point, of course, it is still just fully alleged, but let's see what happens next. So moving on now to Rhode Island, where they've just joined the Bitcoin study race. Rhode Island lawmakers introduced new legislation to create a formal legislative commission to study Bitcoin, crypto, and blockchain technology. The proposal would bring regulators, lawmakers, and industry voices together to examine how digital assets are being used, how existing laws apply, and what changes may be needed as adoption accelerates. This move puts Rhode Island inside a growing company of states. Over the past few years, multiple U.S. states, including Texas, Wyoming, New Hampshire, have launched similar study commissions or task forces. In many cases, those early study-only efforts became the foundation for later pro-Bitcoin legislation, clearer custody rules, and protections for mining. What's different this time is the timing. State houses are no longer just asking, what is Bitcoin? They're asking how to position themselves ahead of capital, talent, and infrastructure. Just last week, Kansas introduced legislation to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It signaled a shift from academic curiosity to direct balance sheet exposure. The signal overall here is clear. Momentum is moving down ballot. While Washington debates market structure, states are quietly competing to become Bitcoin-friendly jurisdictions. First comes the commissions, then comes the laws, and increasingly, the capital follows. I think that this trend is only going to accelerate in the months and years to come here. This is something that makes sense for every state. And why? Because it makes sense for every individual, for every company, for every nation state, for every US state, right? Bitcoin makes sense. Bitcoin is something that everybody needs, whether they realize it yet or not. Again, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And I think as we increasingly see the economic power of Bitcoin holders grow, as Bitcoin does what Bitcoin does, and more importantly, as fiat does what fiat does, which is constantly debase, that economic energy that the Bitcoiners possess is going to continue growing by leaps and bounds. Bitcoiners also will become increasingly mobile. We're in an increasingly mobile world now. People are not so often tied down by physical job locations anymore with the prevalence of remote working. And so in the US and around the world, this isn't just US states, but also different nation states. You're going to see states and nation states competing to offer the most Bitcoin-friendly policy. You are going to, if you have, a brain inside your head as a politician, not all of them do, you're going to want to attract as much talent and capital as you possibly can. And with Bitcoin, that capital is the most mobile it's ever been. It's not tied to a bank account. It's not tied to a stock brokerage, right? It's not bars of gold that you need to move in a Brinks truck around. No, it's in cyberspace. It can move with you. It can move in your head. Those keys can exist just in your head. And so Bitcoiners are going to, they are already and will increasingly vote with their feet. Bitcoiners will move to jurisdictions that are friendlier towards Bitcoiners, that are friendlier in terms of tax treatment, that are friendlier in terms of freedom to operate, that are just friendlier in general towards the ethos of Bitcoin, which is, you know what? We all have the right to be just left alone. It's my money. I'll do with it what I want. We see this in many jurisdictions, from El Salvador to Portugal. Portugal has changed their tax treatment a little bit on Bitcoin, but there are many places around the world where, again, Bitcoin is not subject to tax, not subject to capital gains tax. Let's see if we start to get something like that in the United States. There are, of course, some Bitcoin sort of tax bills and crypto tax bills that are currently being considered. One of the key components of that is the de minimis tax exemption, which would essentially allow any Bitcoin transactions under a certain threshold to be exempt from tax reporting requirements. And I think personally, this is a very interesting development, something that should happen. And honestly, I hope that it's a foot in the door to a much more common sense law, which would be to exempt Bitcoin from all tax. If you do that, if the United States of America does that, now this may be an uphill battle because I'm sure there'll be lots of people who will fight against it because these greedy Bitcoiners are just trying to benefit themselves. But ultimately, Bitcoin is money. It should be treated just like a foreign currency swap is treated, right? If you do this as a nation, you will attract people who have a lot of Bitcoin. If you do this as a U.S. state, right? Because you can make laws at the state level regarding your state taxes that make it more advantageous for Bitcoiners. You will attract more capital. You will attract more talent. You will have people voting with their feet, voting with their wallets, their Bitcoin wallets, and moving to jurisdictions that are friendlier. This is just common sense. You see this capital flees, large pools of capital flees, when wealth taxes are proposed anywhere, whether it be California or over in the Scandinavian countries. Large pools of capital flee when tax treatment becomes potentially really disadvantageous. Large pools of capital flee to places that have more advantageous tax systems. Ultimately, it's a question of why do they have to even tax us at all when they can just print money out of thin air and the government never balances a budget and funds foreign wars over in deserts that we have no interest in besides extracting oil from their ground under the pretense of searching for weapons of mass destruction. But I digress. The larger point here is that people will continue to vote with their feet. In a world where Bitcoin exists, anyone can go anywhere with their Bitcoin keys in their head or wherever you'd like it. Try doing that with gold bars. It may be a much more uncomfortable flight for you, if you know what I mean. We don't have to go there right now. But again, to drill this home, places, whether it be states, whether it be countries, that have more advantageous, more pro-Bitcoin, pro-freedom policies are going to attract more capital. You see this happening at a small degree already with El Salvador, where they've made it very advantageous for Bitcoiners who have a lot of Bitcoin to come down there. They made it very attractive for tech companies to come down there. This is a smart policy. You should do this as a nation if you want to attract the most capital and the most talent, right? Both human capital and monetary capital. If you want that, you need to make it very attractive for that capital to go there. In places where they are growing increasingly toward the socialist side of the spectrum, increasingly making taxes more and more burdensome, and at the same time providing a lower and lower quality of service to their taxpayers, they will see people flee. They are seeing people flee. And I think it's important to remember that the government really should be operating much more like a service provider in this case. The government and government officials are supposed to work for the citizens. We're not supposed to work for them. But as it is right now, we do work for them. We spend somewhere between 30, 40, 50% of all of our time and energy goes towards paying the government, a big old chunk of it. And then, of course, government employees who are paid by our tax dollars who then pay taxes. Well, that's just a big old taxation circle jerk right there. But again, I digress. I'd like to leave you with this before we go to a commercial break. You are going to see a changing world order here where countries that embrace freedom-minded policies, that embrace policies that are aligned with what Bitcoiners want to see, with what a group of people who has an increasingly large amount of economic energy want to see. Those countries are going to flourish. People will flock to them. They will bring their capital, their monetary capital. They will bring their intellectual human capital. They will build businesses. When you make it easy for people to bring their capital somewhere, start businesses, and not be completely just wrecked under the heavy yoke of the state's oppression, you are going to see your country flourish. In the United States, you're going to see your individual state flourish when they make it more attractive. You see this already. You saw it during COVID, a massive flight of people out of states with more aggressive either COVID policies or taxation policies and into states where you have more freedom-minded policies in place. This is not rocket science, people. This is basic common sense. Unfortunately, common sense is something that appears to be in relatively short supply these days, but we'll see. Maybe it'll make a comeback. Maybe common sense will have a bull run. I don't know. It seems that we're in a bit of a bear market of common sense these days. All right, we're going to take a quick break here on RoxomTV. Then I will be back with you for the next half hour to run through a few more stories here on Bitcoin, on gold, I know, on silver as well, and a little bit of world news flavor thrown in. So do not touch that dial. We will be right back here on RoxomTV in just a minute. Stay tuned.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. My name is Walker America. I am here with you every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. At the time of streaming, the price of Bitcoin is 88,897 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per Bitcoin. We are going to now dive into a couple of Bitcoin stories here. The first one is a bit of Bitcoin history because today in Bitcoin history, Silk Road went live. So on this day in 2011, Silk Road went live. It became the first major real-world experiment in using Bitcoin as money on a large scale. It proved that Bitcoin could function outside the traditional financial system, peer-to-peer, censorship-resistant, and without banks or intermediaries. While Silk Road later became infamous at the time, It served as a proof of concept, really, that Bitcoin worked. It was borderless, permissionless, and independent. And that moment helped cement Bitcoin's place in history. The platform was created by Ross William Ulbricht, who operated under the alias Dread Pirate Roberts. In 2013, Ulbricht was arrested, and in 2015, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole, actually 2 life sentences plus 40 years without the chance of parole, one of the harshest sentences ever tied to a nonviolent case. And importantly, no victims were ever named at his trial. He was made an example of very clearly. For years, Ulbricht became a symbol within the Bitcoin and libertarian communities, representing the early internet's fight over privacy, freedom, and individual sovereignty. Then, more than a decade later, the story took a dramatic turn. Last year, January 21st, 2025, Donald Trump granted Ross Ulbricht a full and unconditional pardon, leading to his release after more than 10 years behind bars. For many Bitcoiners, it was a long-awaited moment, a human victory and cultural turning point. So today isn't just about the Silk Road. It's about Bitcoin's earliest chapters. It was messy, it was controversial, but it was groundbreaking. And that all continues to shape its story today. I truly do not think that Bitcoin would be where it is today without the Silk Road, without Ross Ulbricht. I'm so glad that he is free, that he is back with his family. This picture that you're seeing right now of Ross leaving prison with his plant, Leif Erikson, in tow. I just recently saw an update from Ross that plant has now grown into what looks like a small tree. Clearly, it is thriving, being out in the sunshine, being outside the prison walls, as I hope Ross is too. And again, Ross is just such an example of the risks that early Bitcoiners took, that really a freedom-minded individual who wanted to create an opt-in marketplace where, yes, people did share things, did sell things that were perhaps illegal in various jurisdictions. But at the end of the day, people have the right to do what they want with their own bodies. I know Ross believed this. I know that many people believe this still today. And this is a reasonable stance to take. Ultimately, people should be able to decide what they do for themselves. And this, again, was such a ridiculous trial because, again, 2 life sentences plus 40 years without the chance of parole. This is a completely absurd sentence for a non-violent criminal. You have literal murderers that get out after not even spending life in prison. I mean, it's just patently insane. And it's a classic example of the justice system really just trying to make an example of somebody to show them that, look, you better not step out of line, anyone else, because this is what we'll do to you. Ross was made an example of. He had to suffer for over a decade in prison. His mother, his wife, they worked tirelessly to get him out. And, whatever you think of Trump, you have to commend the guy for keeping his word and getting Ross freed. Not just a commutation of his sentence also, but a full and unconditional pardon, which I think is incredibly well deserved. And it's also a testament to how pressure from communities like the libertarian and Bitcoin communities really can make a difference. This is something that can move the needle when you let politicians know that these are things that are valuable to you. Yes, those politicians are going to use them as bargaining chips in elections. Okay, but at least a good man went free. And a man, again, that I do not think Bitcoin would be where it is today if not for this incredible medium of exchange adoption that Ross enabled with the Silk Road from the very early days of Bitcoin. We're going to move on to another Bitcoin story, which is around the Bitcoin hash rate right now, taking a significant drop being triggered by a winter storm. So a powerful winter storm has been sweeping across the United States. I'm certainly feeling it here in the Midwest. And it's delivered a rare real-time stress test for Bitcoin's increasingly U.S.-centric mining industry. As Winter Storm Ferdinand brought extreme cold, snow, ice, and freezing rain, power grids across multiple states came under strain, forcing Bitcoin miners to go offline and sending global hash rate sharply lower. The most visible impact came from Foundry USA, one of the world's largest Bitcoin mining pools. At the height of the storm, Foundry's hash rate fell by roughly 60%, with an estimated 200 exahashes per second taken offline At its lowest point, the pool was contributing just 198 exahash per second, representing about 23% of the global network. Now, US-linked mining pools reported similar pullbacks. Combined, these shutdowns removed well over 100 exahash in the Bitcoin network, with some estimates putting that total reduction near 30 to 40% from recent highs during peak curtailment. Much of the hash rate loss was voluntary, as miners participated in demand response programs and powered down to relieve grid stress, a common practice in states like Texas, where mining is tightly integrated with energy markets through ERCOT. With fewer machines competing to secure blocks, Bitcoin's block times briefly stretched towards 12 minutes, up from the long-term average of around 10 minutes. Transaction throughput slowed modestly, but no major congestion or fee spikes were reported. The network continued to function exactly as designed, with difficulty adjustments set to normalize conditions once miners return. And that is really one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin, is that difficulty adjustment roughly every 2 weeks. If Bitcoin blocks are being mined too quickly, the difficulty ramps up. If they're being mined too slowly, the difficulty ramps down. It is a self-correcting mechanism. It is a change that happens automatically in Bitcoin without any need for input from a centralized party. And this episode broadly highlights a growing reality. As mining capacity concentrates in North America, extreme weather is becoming a short-term variable in Bitcoin's operational rhythm. Still, Fernan ultimately reinforced Bitcoin's resilience. Blocks kept coming. Miners responded flexibly, and the network absorbed the shock without any disruption. Despite the sharp hash rate drawdown, Bitcoin's price largely shrugged off the event, briefly dipping, but now it's stabilizing. Markets appeared focused on broader macro forces rather than mining interruptions, and it's a familiar reminder that temporary operational shocks rarely dictate Bitcoin's price. As temperatures rise and miners power back up, hash rate is already expected to recover, leaving Fernan as another example of Bitcoin adapting to the real world instead of breaking under it. And another important point here to bring up is that this is just a classic example of why Bitcoin is so powerful. There's a lot of FUD out there. We've got rid of most of the Bitcoin environmental FUD, right? That Bitcoin is somehow hurting power grids, that it's bad for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. Great work by the likes of people like Daniel Batten to combat that FUD over these past few years. But the FUD has still found its way back into the discourse somehow. There was a recent post by New Scientist that really highlighted this. Let's go ahead and roll this clip so people can see for themselves what New Scientist had to say about Bitcoin.
The problem isn't necessarily Bitcoin itself or cryptocurrency itself. It's actually the mining. It takes a colossal amount of computing power to mine a single Bitcoin. It uses up as much energy as some entire countries still. Just Bitcoin, not cryptocurrency in general.
And in terms of if it is a good investment or not, you had some interesting comparisons with that, didn't you?
Basically, if you look at sort of the recent history, you're better off just buying a bunch of Pokemon cards than Bitcoin. It is just a big betting market. The other problem is that you can't use Bitcoin for anything. So if you've got a bunch of Bitcoin, it's hard to make a transaction. Very few places accept it. The average carbon footprint of a flight from London to New York is smaller than a single Bitcoin transaction. So environmentally, it would be better to just take your cash and put it in a briefcase and fly it to wherever you're sending it. So right now, it's just this betting market that's great if you want to do crimes in an untraceable way, but it's not useful for a whole lot more than that.
Yeah, so you mentioned the dark web, basically. So you can't buy firearms and missiles with Pokemon cards, but you can with Bitcoin. The dark web, it didn't really exist before Bitcoin came along, did it?
Democrats need to be more than...
Okay, this is just absolutely insane. I mean, okay, I don't know if I've ever heard so much absolutely idiotic Bitcoin FUD packed into such a short amount of time. I thought that we were done with this, to be honest. I thought that we had moved on. I thought that more people had functioning brains than they apparently do. This is just patently absurd. The tweet that accompanied this absurd video is that Bitcoin is one big disaster for the environment. And I'm quoting the tweet here. Mining Bitcoin requires an inordinate amount of energy, is a terrible investment these days, and fuels crime on the dark web. Is this a contender for the worst idea of the 21st century? I mean, I'm sorry. This just, I'm trying not to call names here. I'm trying to remain respectful, but this is just truly moronic. I cannot believe anyone said this with a straight face. First of all, these are blatant lies, right? And thankfully, there was a community note thrown in on this post that said the post contains multiple factually inaccurate claims. Number one, that they refuted here. They said the use of virtual assets for money laundering continues to remain far below that of fiat currency, obviously. And then two, they added 22 peer-reviewed papers suggest Bitcoin has environmental benefits. And here, it not only has environmental benefits, but it has grid stabilization benefits, as we're literally seeing right now. And to make these other claims, saying things like, oh, this is, it's only used for criminal activity. No one uses Bitcoin. All of that, it's terrible for the environment, all of these things. I mean, it's like these are just the same recycled narratives that you heard from 5 years ago or so, but apparently they're making a comeback. I don't know if the new scientist is just struggling for clicks and trying to bait people or what, but you know what? You baited me and it worked, if that was the case, because I just cannot stand to see this kind of just terrible, terrible reporting from a publication that has 4.1 million followers on X. Let's be honest, they probably bought most of them in their bots, but still, it's absolutely insane to see this kind of just blatantly false, absolutely destructive rhetoric coming from a publication that claims to be about, science, or maybe it's just the science, TM. I'm not so sure. But at the end of the day, some people who don't know any better may read this, listen to this, and think, oh my gosh, maybe Bitcoin is a contender for the worst idea of the 21st century. But imagine saying that with a straight face. Imagine saying with a straight face that Bitcoin is the worst idea of the 21st century. Imagine saying that the monetary technology that was birthed after the great financial crisis in response to the massive bailouts that happened by taxpayers to bail out the big banks in the US and in the UK and around the world, imagine saying that that's the worst idea of the 21st century. Imagine saying that the technology that allows people across the global south to actually bank themselves because they are debanked or never had a bank in the first place and live under authoritarian, oppressive regimes, imagine saying that's the worst idea of the 21st century. Imagine saying the idea that allows women in countries where women aren't allowed to have bank accounts in the Middle East. Imagine saying that that technology is the worst idea of the 21st century. Imagine saying that Bitcoin is the worst idea of the 21st century when it is literally one of the only lifelines that people have, especially younger generations, to escape the constant and ever-present debasement of their currency and theft of their purchasing power through inflation. I mean, imagine saying that, we're not talking about any of the other just garbage ideas that are out there, but no, Bitcoin, the thing that exists that has separated money from state, that gives the average person, that treats the average person the same as it treats the president, that treats the average person the same as it treats the nation state, that cannot discriminate, that doesn't care what color you are, that doesn't care what sex you are, that doesn't care where you're from in the world. Imagine saying that that is the worst idea of the 21st century. This isn't just bad journalism. This is just frankly disgusting. This is just, I don't want to, what's the old saying? Don't assume malice when it may be incompetence, something like that. I don't know if this is incompetence. I don't know if this is malice. But either way, this person got up, decided to go on camera, and then not only this one person, but all three of them in this video, and basically just spout out all of the most idiotic, debunked rhetoric that they possibly could about what I believe is the most impactful and positive development of the 21st century. I mean, that's the thing. They could not be more wrong on this. They're saying it's one of a contender for the worst idea of the 21st century. The thing that literally is reshaping the world in front of us, that treats everybody the same, that is unconfiscatable, uncensorable, undebasable money. And they're saying that's the worst idea. I don't know. Maybe the purplish blue hair dye seeped into this person's brain and caused a little bit of damage. I'm not sure, but honestly, this is just embarrassing for New Scientist. You should be ashamed of yourself for running such a garbage story and for honestly misinforming people out there. Because the sad reality is that many people will look at this and think, oh, okay, well, this is coming from a reputable source, must be true. This kind of rhetoric is damaging. It prevents the average person from taking the time to actually understand Bitcoin because they write it off. Now, you may say the responsibility lies in the individual. Agreed. But all of this rhetoric that I thought we had stamped out, especially around the environmental side of things, all of this coming back when Bitcoin is actually a net positive for the environment, when it incentivizes the build out of renewables, which apparently, these same people would probably purportedly care about, when it incentivizes responsible grid management and grid stabilization. And in a place like the UK, for example, where they curtail over $1 billion worth of electricity per year because they overbuilt wind and solar and they don't have anywhere to put it when demand is low and the taxpayer pays for it, you would think that they would view this as actually a positive thing. But no, instead they've decided to use their time, to use their platform, and to cast aspersions on the greatest invention, discovery, creation, whatever you want to call it, of the 21st century. History will not look kindly on these people. They will be held up as examples of the absolute buffoonery that happens in the legacy media. It's a sad state of affairs. And, sorry for that little rant there, but this kind of stuff just annoys me because at the end of the day, it hurts adoption. And what I mean by that is it hurts everyday people who maybe don't have the time to look into Bitcoin deeply, but see this come up and maybe take it as gospel. Again, do your own research, take your own time to do this. But the sad reality is that this kind of stuff hurts adoption. And it's frankly, you're just lying. You're just blatantly lying out there and using a large platform to do so, which I find just disgusting and a complete, just evidence of a complete lack of any sort of journalistic integrity. But okay, at risk of ranting for too long here, one other story that I want to cover before we get out, which is that our favorite shiny metal, gold, which, by the way, is incredibly detrimental to the environment, that is mined by children in third world countries and extracted from them to, go over and keep Peter Schiff company in his basement. But I digress. Past $5,100 per ounce as investors flee to safe haven assets. Gold prices have surged to fresh record highs. They broke above $5,100 per ounce. This as investors rush into the metal amid rising geopolitical tensions and growing uncertainty over U.S. economic and trade policy. Spot gold climbed as much as 2.2% at an all-time peak of $5,110.50, while U.S. futures rose in tandem, exceeding what has already been one of the strongest rallies in decades. The gold bugs finally get their time in the sun. Good for them. Now, analysts say this surge reflects deepening concerns about political instability, erratic policy signals from Washington, and weakening confidence in U.S. assets. But the rally follows a year in which gold jumped more than 60%, the biggest annual gain since the late 1970s. And of course, in 1971, that's when Richard Nixon finally put the nail in the coffin of the gold standard. This was fueled this recent rally by bank buying, strong investor inflows, and expectations of easier monetary policy. China has been buying gold for more than a year straight, or allegedly been buying gold. We don't know because you can't audit it like Bitcoin. While exchange-traded funds have seen record inflows. Market analysts say that the recent swings in U.S. trade policy, including shifting tariff threats linked to Greenland and Canada, have reinforced gold's role as a hedge against political risk. A weaker U.S. dollar also boosted demand, making gold cheaper for international buyers, while investors have cut back on dollar holdings ahead of key Federal Reserve decisions. Some describe the surge as a crisis of confidence in U.S. leadership, driving investors towards hard assets. Some analysts now forecast prices could approach $5,500 to $6,000 later this year if tensions persist and central bank demand remains strong. But I don't know about you, this feels pretty toppy in gold right now. Other precious metals have followed gold higher. Silver reached a record of $109 an ounce. Platinum also caught a pretty strong bid. Again, all of these industrial metals, some of which were once used as money, thousands of years ago, have been catching a pretty strong bid here. And, again, one of the important things to know here is that just last night or just yesterday, we saw gold and silver combined erase $1.7 trillion worth of market cap in 90 minutes in one of the largest reversals in history. $1.7 trillion, for perspective, that's the market cap of Bitcoin. It just erased the entire market cap of Bitcoin in 90 minutes. So if you think Bitcoin can't go absolutely, rip multiples higher, if you think that we're now going to be in a point of diminishing returns, silver just basically tripled its market cap in the space of this past year, right? We just lost, silver and gold combined just lost the entire market cap of Bitcoin in 90 minutes. In the last 13 months, approximately, silver is up about 270%. Bitcoin has fallen 11%. The silver's market cap is now 3.5 times larger than Bitcoin. So what I'll leave you with is this. Do whatever you want with your Federal Reserve notes that you have. I personally convert mine into Bitcoin whenever I get a chance. Not financial advice, but monetary advice here. And right now we see people piling into gold and silver. Now, central banks have been front running that, right? More sophisticated investors have been front running it. But now we see a bit of retail mania starting to take place. The reality is also that the vast majority, high 90s% of people who own gold don't actually own physical gold. They own paper promises of gold, right? Now, Bitcoin's market cap is under $2 trillion. Again, gold and silver combined just erased Bitcoin's entire market cap in the space of 90 minutes. Bitcoin has not been catching the same bid as precious metals. Bitcoin at the time of recording, 89,304 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per coin. And what I'd like to emphasize is this. Gold tends to be a canary in the coal mine, right? It tends to be a bit of a leading indicator of what people are thinking. There is a flee towards perceived safe haven assets. But at the end of the day, when gold price goes up, what happens? Well, people mine more gold to sell it at higher prices. The supply increases, the price goes down. Same thing with silver. The price of silver goes up, people mine more silver because they want to sell it at those high prices. What happens when the price of Bitcoin goes up? Nobody can mine more Bitcoin. That's Bitcoin's supply issuance is fixed, right? The difficulty adjusts every 2 weeks approximately. So even if you add a ton of hash rate or remove a ton of hash rate, as we've seen, the network then stabilizes the difficulty with that difficulty adjustment. And you can never make more than the 21 million Bitcoin, right? That's it. So all of the people who are piling into the current shiny objects, right? Whether that's the literal shiny objects of gold and silver, or the figuratively shiny object of AI stocks or quantum stocks, whatever it might be, they're ultimately chasing gains, right? And that's what, of course, everyone is doing, right? But personally, I save in Bitcoin to be able to maintain the purchasing power and grow my purchasing power in a meaningful way. I think that what we're going to see in this year to come here, in 2026, if I'm thinking short term, is that we're going to see a massive rotation from gold and silver into Bitcoin. Maybe it won't even be a massive, too massive a rotation. Maybe gold and silver kind of flatline here, but they look pretty toppy to me right now. Everybody seems to be wanting to pile in to these pseudo precious metals. Personally, I'm taking this as an opportunity because while everybody else is chasing that shiny object, Bitcoin has been kind of boring, right? People are kind of bearish on Bitcoin. Maybe we've been in a bear market. We're still in a bear market denominated in gold terms. Yeah, maybe you thought we went into a bull market in US dollars, but we haven't actually reached prior gold denominated all-time highs for Bitcoin. So I think Bitcoin has a lot of room to run. And if you zoom out beyond just the next year, you look at the next 4 years, the next decade, right? Bitcoin is going to catch an infinite bid because there is always going to be more fiat currency. There is never going to be more than 21 million Bitcoin. And so while we see gold bugs and silver simps having their day in the sun, I hope they enjoy it. I hope Peter Schiff enjoys dancing on the early grave of Bitcoin while he has a chance, because before too long, Peter's going to be singing a different tune. He's going to be back to doing what he does when Bitcoin pumps, which is calling Bitcoin a scam, a Ponzi. Better get out while you still can. Well, he's been saying that since Bitcoin was $100 a coin. So sorry, Peter, you just don't have the best track record on this. But I'll let this gold bugs and the silver simps have their day in the sun. But I would caution if their market caps can wipe out 1.7 trillion in the space of 90 minutes. I don't know about you, but those pseudo precious metals just seem a little bit too volatile to me. It might be worth getting some Bitcoin, something that's a little bit more stable, a little bit more predictable. I don't know. Again, not financial advice, just a little monetary advice here. Okay, we're at the end of our time here, folks. Thank you for joining me today. Again, I'm Walker America. I am here with you on RoxomTV every Tuesday from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I also join Hank at Roxom on his shows on Thursdays and Fridays, so tune in then as well. Thank you for tuning into RoxomTV. We appreciate having you all here. Thanks for indulging my little rants here at the end, but at the end of a 3-hour episode, it is important to get some of these rants off of our chests. So make sure to subscribe and like and follow and all that stuff to RoxomTV. here, wherever you get your streams. Thank you guys for joining me again. I'm Walker America. I will see you Thursday and Friday, but then I will see you next Tuesday, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on RoxomTV. See you guys later.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency.